Chapter 403. In order to overthrow Tiandu, the 9 Serenities had been planning for tens of thousands of years. They had been waiting for the revival of spirit energy and the rise of the human world. Only then would this ferocious beast from the primordial times finally wake up from its deep slumber. Not everyone wanted to ascend to Tiandu. Those who had successfully broken through to the celestial realm but did not ascend became the most staunch supporters of the 9 Serenities. Just like Jiang Yan, they chose to stay in the lower realm and continue to cultivate. If their lifespan ran out, they would voluntarily give up their physical bodies and let their souls enter the soul crystal in order to continue living. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, generation after generation, many people chose to give up because they could not stand the eternal loneliness. However, there were even more people who persevered. There were always sacrifices on the road to revolution. Countless people advanced dauntlessly, just to welcome the moment when they were truly needed. Tens of thousands of years passed, and the world changed. Finally, the time had come. Jiang Yan was not the founder of the 9 Serenities, but he was a core member. If Tiandu was compared to the Qin dynasty, then Jiang Yan was Xiang Yu, who raised the banner of righteousness high. The 300 celestials of the Jiang clan, they were the disciples of Jiang Dong under his command. Jiang Yan was indeed a ruthless person. If he was not ruthless, he would not have been able to sit on the throne of the 9 Serenities. In order to achieve his lofty goal, Jiang Yan chose to sacrifice his own family, thus creating the 9 Serenities. It was precisely because of this that the once glorious Jiang clan of Daiyu Island had now become the arsenal of the 9 Serenities, providing the 9 Serenities with excellent physical bodies. Although the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in their bones, their souls had long been replaced by others. Of course, for Tiandu, a mere 20 or so yuanying was naturally nothing. What really frightened Wushu was, Tiandu was unaware of this. For tens of thousands of years, people from the lower realm had constantly ascended to Tiandu. However, after these people ascended, what they saw was not the fairyland they had imagined. Instead, they saw all kinds of injustice. They were like black people who had been smuggled into Huaxia. No one would look them in the eye, and no one would care what they were thinking. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. Ascenders were constantly discriminated against, ridiculed, and ostracized. No matter how high their cultivation base was, they were just lowly people from the lower realms. Tiandu had never cared about the lowly people of the lower realm. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from heaven capital when Qin Shi flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought the so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 Serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 Serenities, including Qin Shi, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Qin Shi stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yan had already known of Qin Shi's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yan had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Qin Shi when Qin Shi first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yan was guiding Qin Shi, trying to pull Qin Shi to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 Serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yan did not know why Qin Shi was working so hard to find Wushu. But he knew very well that Wushu was not just a divine general. Wushu, he was actually Yuhuan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wushu, who would face Yuhuan Tianzuan's wrath? It would not be Jiang Yan, nor would it be the 9 Serenities. It would be Qin Shi, who had always been at the forefront. Wushu's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yuhuan Tianzuan could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to heavenly venerable wondrous spells, hoping that heavenly venerable wondrous spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wushu grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wushu would always call him Yuhuan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wushu showed to heavenly venerable wondrous spells, Wushu was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yuhuan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wushu, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through heavenly venerable wondrous spells, he indirectly gave Wushu all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close. So, when Wushu saw the Yin-Yang 6 directions array being activated again, a relieved smile suddenly appeared on his face. It was the same array formation, but the person who said it was completely different. Wushu held the flag in his hand, already understanding what he was about to face. So, before Jiang Yan made a move, Wushu suddenly raised his head and let out a long howl. Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, this time, I'm really going to fall. Although you can't hear me, but I'll call you again, father. Speaking of this, Wushu's expression suddenly froze. Immediately after, he did not forget to ridicule himself. As expected, I'm not used to it after not calling you for a long time, Yuhuan Tianzuan. Did you hear that? Your son is being bullied, remember to avenge him. Father. Wushu did not say the last word out loud. Instead, he silently repeated it in his heart. Then, he raised the Wuji apricot yellow flag high up, and like the only remaining flag bearer on the battlefield, he charged towards the 9 underworlds led by Jiang Yan alone. Even if the entire army was killed, the flag bearer could not fall. If he fell, it would be a true annihilation. Jiang Yan looked at Wushu coldly. Even though Wushu was surrounded, Jiang Yan did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he decisively ordered everyone to attack at the same time, not giving Wushu any chance of survival. In an instant, a bloody light lit up the sky. From afar, it was as beautiful as the sunset. In the end, this piece of pure land in the extreme north was dyed red with blood. Not long after the battle began, Chen Shi, who was patrolling the South Pacific Ocean, suddenly sensed something and looked towards the north. Bai Hong was confused, so she asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong." After that, Chen Shi didn't wait for Bai Hong to respond. Chapter 404. 9 underworlds came out in full force and set up an inescapable net just to kill Wushu. Wushu was only a Yuanian cultivator. Even with all his treasures, there was no way he could defend against 20 Yuanian cultivators and countless golden core cultivators. Although Wushu knew that he had no chance of winning, he did not lose his fighting spirit. Instead, he exploded with a fighting spirit that was far stronger than before. This was the most serious battle he had ever fought in his life. Even a trapped beast would put up a fight, let alone a human. He was a divine general of Tiandu and the only son of Yuhuan Tianzuan. He represented Tiandu, so even though he knew that he would die, he had to die with dignity. Therefore, Wushu decided to burn his Yuanying. He did not want to run anymore. The scenery at the North Pole was not bad. It would be one of the happiest things in his life to be able to sleep here. After Wushu let out a long roar, his body began to burn like firewood. At that moment, blood dyed the sky red. The sound of spells exploding could be heard continuously. It was as if the spell was playing a requiem for this arrogant and slightly neurotic man. The burning of Yuanying would not last for long. Therefore, the battle quickly came to an end. This was a battle that seemed short, but was actually extremely tragic. Wushu thought that killing one was enough, and killing two was worth it. When he was about to die, he actually used a secret technique to detonate the yellow flag and white bone soul summoning flag in his hands. The 2 9th-grade spirit treasures exploded at the same time, destroying the souls of the 3 Yuanying stage cultivators closest to him on the spot. At the same time, the yin and yang six directions formation was successfully shattered, causing the spiritual energy to dissipate, which successfully attracted Chen Shi's attention. As for Wushu himself, of course, he was also turned into a wisp of smoke in the explosion. From now on, there would be no more divine general named Wushu in this world. Reporting to Yuzun, Wushu's Sumera mustard seed bag has been found. The formation imprint has been destroyed according to your orders. Please give us the order. Very good, let's retreat. It's time for our old friend to take the stage. The 9 Serenities had lost 3 Yuanying in this battle, but Jiang Yan did not seem to feel the slightest bit of heartache. Instead, he calmly ordered his men to clean up the battlefield as quickly as possible. He knew that Chen Shi would come, so he had to hide everything before Chen Shi arrived. Otherwise, where would he find such a good scapegoat? After receiving Jiang Yan's order, the generals of the 9 Serenities did not even bother to clean up the battlefield. They quietly retreated like a receding tide, leaving behind only the messy aftermath of the battle. Chen Shi rushed to the Arctic Circle as fast as he could. His intuition told him that this true essence fluctuation was not simple. But unfortunately, Chen Shi was like the police in the movies. He was always the last to arrive. By the time he arrived at the scene of the incident with Bai Hong, everything had disappeared. All that was left was a shattered ice field that seemed to have experienced a carpet bombing. Some broken spell imprints were vaguely left in the air. Chen Shi silently sensed them. He felt that these spells were familiar, but he could not tell where he had seen them before. It was very strange. It was a bit like the Jiang family's true 6-trigram spell, but it was much more exquisite. It was far beyond the level of the Jiang family. Chen Shi knew the ins and outs of Daiyu Island very well, so he did not even think about Jiang Yan. Therefore, he could not even figure out what had happened here. Who was fighting? What level of battle was it? Judging from the true essence fluctuation that he had sensed earlier, the level of this battle was far beyond Chen Shi's imagination. The Battle of the Yuanying? When did Earth become so terrifying? Chen Shi silently sensed the spell imprints in the air, trying to find some clues from them. Bai Hong, on the other hand, began a carpet search in the snow. Finally, under a pile of soft snow, Bai Hong successfully found a tattered piece of cloth about the size of a fingernail. This rag was yellow with golden threads embroidered on it. It was obviously not an ordinary item. Bai Hong picked up the tattered piece of cloth and carefully rubbed it in her hand. Immediately after, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and even his pupils couldn't help but dilate a lot. This is the Wuji apricot yellow flag? Bai Hong did not dare to believe his guess. He tried to sense some spiritual energy from it, but this rag was no different from an ordinary tablecloth. Other than the brighter color, there was nothing special about it. Under normal circumstances, magic treasures could be recycled and reused. For example, Chen Shi had recycled Qing Luan's spear. But if this magic treasure was a natal magic treasure, and its owner used a secret technique to detonate it, this magic treasure would be completely destroyed. Even if it was picked up, it would take up too much space. In an instant, Bai Hong's mind went blank. After staring blankly for a long while, he began to search in the snow as if he had gone mad. Chen Shi noticed his abnormal behavior, so he stopped what he was doing and used his divine sense to help Bai Hong search. This search was incredible. After Chen Shi picked up a palm-sized rag from the snow, Bai Hong was stunned. It's Wushu, it's really him. Hearing this, even Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Wushu? This guy was covered with high-level magic treasures to defend himself, and he had the blood escape technique to save his life. Even he was not 100% sure that he could kill Wushu. Who on earth could do it? At the same time, the great world. Tiandu. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was currently standing in a pavilion filled with candlelight. Next to each candle was a small wooden tablet with different names written on it. It looked like a memorial tablet in the ancestral hall. Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up one of the wooden tablets with trembling hands. The wooden tablet had the words Wushu written on it. He seemed to be a little unable to believe what he saw. So after picking up the wooden tablet and carefully touching it, Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up the candle next to it. The other candles were still burning well, but this one was extinguished. Wushu, my son, can you tell father, what did you encounter in the lower realm? This was the heart fire lamp. Every day, when a newborn was born, the heart fire would be used as a lamp. The heart fire lamp could not be extinguished. Once it was extinguished, it meant that the owner of the lamp was dead. And this was the so-called, when the person died, the lamp went out. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan was the supreme of Tiandu, after seeing Wushu's heart fire lamp go out, he couldn't help but shed 2 lines of hot tears. But a celestial lord was a celestial lord after all. Even if the grief in his heart was extreme, he had to wait until this grief subsided before he stepped out of the attic again. Pass down my orders. Order the 5 divine generals to return immediately and take the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror, build the soul bridge, open the gate of heaven. Chapter 405. Following the extinguishment of the heart flame lamp, Yuhuan Tianzuan, in a fit of rage, officially put the opening of the divine gate on the agenda. For a moment, the great world was in a state of panic and trepidation. Under the influence of the 9 underworlds, the seemingly tranquil earth gradually became turbulent and unpredictable, with undercurrents surging. Chen Shi had always wanted to stay out of this, but he did not know that he had already become a chess piece in Jiang Yan's hands. He and Bai Hong searched the Arctic tundra for a long time before they finally had to believe Wushu was most likely dead. Otherwise, how could they explain the destruction of the Wuji apricot yellow flag? If it wasn't a last resort, no one would detonate their life source magic weapon. This was a 9th grade spiritual treasure. Once combined with the other 4 flags, it could form a treasure comparable to the Tian Yen sword. Therefore, Qin Shi really could not understand who on earth could have forced Wushu to such a state. If even Qin Shi could not figure it out, Bai Hong naturally could not figure it out either. Chengli's death at Qin Shi's hands was pardonable. After all, the 3 of them together were no match for Qin Shi, not to mention Chengli alone. During this period of time, Qin Shi had been with Bai Hong, so Wushu's murderer was definitely not Qin Shi. But then who could it be? Other than the heavenly venerate, Bai Hong really could not think of anyone else who had such ability. When did the lower realm become so dangerous? Qin Shi and Bai Hong had the same question in their hearts. But the most important question was not this question, but, now that Wushu was dead, where should they go to find the soul mirror? Qin Shi had no choice but to bring Bai Hong back to Shangjing and let him see Qin Ruoying, who was still in a coma. Qin Ruoying had been in a coma for more than half a month. During this time, she had not woken up. Her pulse and breathing were still normal, so she looked like a vegetable. Qin Shi could not accept this result. Neither could Ninian. Therefore, Qin Shi clearly told Bai Hong, if Yingying did not wake up, then he could only bring Bai Hong to the divine gate personally. Bai Hong followed Qin Shi to the kindergarten to sneak a peek at the cute little fellow and completely believed Qin Shi's words. But unfortunately, Bai Hong was just an ordinary divine general, so his knowledge was limited. Therefore, after seeing Qin Ruoying's condition, he could only frown and analyze. After Chengli went missing, Yuhuan Tianzuan gave the soul mirror to Master so that he could send people to the lower realm at any time. Master loved, of Wushu of Wushu of Wushu Master's Master, Fong of Wushu of Heaven of Heaven, of Wushu of Heaven of the Divine of Heaven of Heaven, of Wus of Heaven, s. Speaking of this, Bai Hong suddenly stopped, and then put on a thoughtful expression. At this point, Bai Hong already knew that Qin Shi had fought with Wushu and forced him to use the blood escape technique. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he continued, I didn't know that Wushu had already descended. Since you forced Wushu to use the blood escape technique, he must have been severely injured. Wushu couldn't force open the divine gate on his own, so he stayed in the lower realm to recuperate, and you just said that your wife has been unconscious for half a month. If that's the case, the soul mirror can't be in Wushu's hands. He must have left the soul mirror in divine capital before he descended. Hearing this, Qin Shi was stunned. Wasn't this King nonsense? After going in such a big circle, he still had to enter the divine gate to solve the problem? Qin Shi's patience had run out. So without saying a word, he pulled Bai Hong and flew directly to the sky above Shangjing City. Opening the divine gate required a spirit energy tide, right? There was no spirit energy tide now, right? At most, he could artificially create a spirit energy tide. Chen-shi had already thought it through. He was not going to divine capital to fight, but to reason with them. As long as he could solve Yingying's illness, he didn't even mind becoming friends with divine capital. A soul formation stage cultivator had taken the initiative to express his goodwill. Presumably, any faction with a brain wouldn't refuse. Bai Hong was shocked by Chen-shi's courage. He was imprisoned by Chen-shi for more than half a year, and he dreamed of returning to divine capital. Seeing that Chen-shi took the initiative to take him back, Bai Hong was naturally happy, so he wanted Chen-shi to bring Qing Wan and Shui Xiang along. As long as the three of them could return to divine capital safely, Bai Hong promised to let bygones be bygones. He was also willing to recommend Chen-shi so that Chen-shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror. After all, Chen-shi just wanted to borrow the soul mirror, not occupy it permanently, so the heavenly venerables wouldn't be so stingy. The two reached a consensus. Then, Chen-shi used himself as the eye of the formation and the entire Shangjing city as the formation pattern to forcibly set off a huge spirit energy storm in the sky. A steady stream of spirit energy rushed to the center of the storm. In less than a while, this storm evolved into a turbulent tide of spiritual energy. Taking advantage of the gap between Chen-shi's maintenance of the tide, Bai Hong hid at the side and frantically grasped the spirit energy of heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the spirit energy, Bai Hong's skin gradually became white and rosy, so much so that he looked much younger. Chen-shi used his own vital essence to gather the tide. This action was like reaching into a water tank and stirring it, forming a waterspout in the water. The whole process didn't require too much effort, so Chen-shi could persist for a long time. But he didn't know the reason. Chen-shi maintained it from noon to afternoon. The tide was getting bigger and bigger, but the divine gates still didn't open. Now that Nyan was about to finish school, Chen-shi hesitated again and again, and finally had to temporarily withdraw his vital essence. Then, he turned to look at Bai Hong and asked, "What's the situation? Why hasn't the divine gate opened?" Hearing this, Bai Hong also looked around in confusion. It didn't make sense. Wushu's life and death were unknown. Didn't Yu Huan Tianzuan send someone down to check the situation? There were two conditions to open the divine gate. One was the appearance of a powerful spirit energy tide in the lower realm, and the other was the heavenly effecate floating mirror. Under normal circumstances, once a spirit energy tide appeared in the lower realm, Tiandu would use the heavenly effecate floating mirror to open the divine gate so that sinners in the lower realm could ascend. Of course, Tiandu would also occasionally send divine generals down to the lower realm to carry out various missions, such as Bai Hong and Wushu. Wushu's identity was extraordinary. How could Yu Huan Tianzuan, as his father, not be worried at all? "I don't know, maybe something happened up there. Why don't we try again tomorrow?" Chen-shi was speechless. After glaring fiercely at Bai Hong, he flew back to Shangjing city without a word. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly chased after him and asked, "Hey, where are you going?" "To pick up my child from school." "Why didn't the divine gate open?" "That was because Tiandu was using the soul mirror as the core to prepare to build a soul bridge." Wushu's unexpected death made Yu Huan Tianzuan, who had been hesitating, finally make up his mind. Because of this, the heavenly venerables also reached a consensus. So when the soul bridge was completed. Chapter 406. January 26th. The little girl, who had been in kindergarten for a semester, finally welcomed the first winter break in her life. Before the break, the teacher held a class meeting to remind the parents of the things to pay attention to during the break. At the same time, she gave the children a winter break homework. The winter break homework of the kindergarten was naturally not as exaggerated as that of the middle school. At most, it was only 2 or 3 pages. The content was mainly to write numbers from memory, review pinyin, memorize nursery rhymes, and so on. She only hoped that the children would not forget all the things the teacher taught after the winter break. "Goodbye, teacher. I'll miss you. Nyan Nyan, good girl. I'll wait for you at school." See you next semester, goodbye. The little girl nodded her little head like she was pounding garlic. After waving goodbye to the teacher reluctantly, she turned her head to look at the two brothers. Now that the two brothers were sent to and from school by Xia Kaiji, they naturally could not go to school with her every day. Now that the winter break was finally here, the three children agreed to meet at the tea house tomorrow and then go to the ice rink to play. Wen, Mingming, see you tomorrow. The little girl held Qinshi's hand and waited very politely until Xia Kaiji's car started. Then, she turned around and followed Qinshi home. The closer it was to the end of the year, the more deserted Shangjing City seemed. Every time the little girl breathed, she would exhale a stream of hot air. She thought it was very fun, so from time to time, she would raise her little head and then imitate the dubbing in the short video. She would pout her mouth and shout a Chinibyu line, "The evil dragon roars a woo-woo." The little girl was like a cute little sun. Even in this cold winter, she could still bring some warmth to Qinshi. The father and daughter held hands and walked slowly on the street. Before Qinshi could find a topic to talk about, the little girl asked first as usual, "Daddy, is mommy better today?" "Yes, she's better. She just got up and steamed some soup dumplings for you. When you get home, it'll be ready." Qinshi gently squeezed the little girl's little hand and a bright smile appeared on his face. The little girl did not have any doubts about this. This was because the food her mother made tasted obviously different from the food her father made. She could tell. When it came to eating, the little thing was obviously a little greedy, so it shook Qinshi's arm and laughed, "Mommy's soup dumplings are also very delicious. I can eat 3. "Really? Daddy will bring you 3 in a while. You have to finish them all." "No problem." Qinshi carefully coaxed the little fellow. He didn't want Nyanyan to know that Qin Ruoying had been sick in bed, so he deliberately cooked ordinary food from time to time to deceive the little girl and tell her that it was her mother who cooked it. At first, the little fellow was naturally convinced. But after a long time, the little fellow still felt a little strange. Since her mother could wake up to cook for her, why couldn't she wait until school was over before going to bed? The little guy blinked his big eyes and suddenly realized, "I haven't talked to my mother for a long time." Every time she came home, her mother was sleeping, so she could only watch TV silently. She didn't dare to run around the room because she was afraid of disturbing her mother. Ever since her mother fell ill, the house had become a lot more deserted. It was just that the little fellow was still young, so she didn't understand the true meaning of the word deserted. "Daddy, when will mommy get better?" "Soon. The doctor said that mommy doesn't have any major problems. She just needs to rest for a period of time to recover." Similar conversations kept repeating. The little fellow was distressed because of her mother's illness. How could Qinshi not be distressed? He would set off a spirit energy tide in the sky above Shangjing City every day, but he had never seen the divine gate open. Therefore, Qinshi's heart tightened. He just wanted to go to Tiandu to seek a soul mirror to cure Qin Ruoying's illness. Why did the divine gate refuse to open? Did he have to wait for the spirit energy tide to appear naturally? Qinshi was very distressed. But this kind of distress couldn't be shown in front of the little fellow. Therefore, he felt as if his heart was being pressed under a big rock, and he almost couldn't breathe. When would these days come to an end? Qinshi talked to the little fellow as he secretly pondered. The father and daughter soon returned home. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Bai Hong walking back and forth in the courtyard, so she took the initiative to wave at him and smiled. "Uncle Bai. Good afternoon. I'm out of school." Hearing this, Bai Hong seemed to have something on her mind. After forcing a smile at the little fellow, she looked at Qinshi with a face full of apprehension. For the sake of convenience, Qinshi left Bai Hong in the courtyard for this period of time. With the restriction guarding, he wasn't afraid of Bai Hong stirring up any storms. After all, this guy had just burned his yuanying and was almost a cripple now. Qinshi and Bai Hong looked at each other, but found that Bai Hong's expression was very strange today. It seemed like he was afraid of something. Why would Bai Hong be afraid? This guy didn't even care about his life. Why would he be afraid? Thinking of this, Qin asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you?" However, after hearing Qin question, Bai Hong seemed to be agitated and couldn't help but tremble. Then, he pointed to the west wing with a panicked face. West wing? Qin was stunned. Immediately, he understood what Bai Hong was afraid of. Then, Qin figure suddenly disappeared from the little fellow's side. When he appeared again, he was already at Qin Ruoying's bedside. In the room, Qin Ruoying was still lying quietly on the bed. Qin came to her side and wanted to reach out and touch his lover's cheek, but at this moment, his hands suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably. The moment his fingers touched Yingying's cheek, Qin froze. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. Qin's consciousness was rapidly pulled away, as if his soul had left his body. Even though his lover was close at hand, he felt that he was getting further and further away from Yingying. Finally, Qin's trembling fingertips touched Qin Ruoying's cheek. But where he touched, it was ice cold. In fact, how sensitive were Qin's 5 senses? From the moment he stepped into the room, he realized that Qin Ruoying's breathing had stopped. This news came too suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, and instantly stunned Qin. Yingying had stopped breathing? How could it be? He just went to pick up Nian from school. How long had he been delayed? What exactly happened? Bai Hong, tell me. Chapter 407. What the hell was going on? Qin's mind went blank, leaving only this question echoing in his heart. No pulse, no breathing, no heartbeat, even the blood had stopped flowing. In medical terms, death in the absolute sense meant that there was no heartbeat and the brain was dead. At this moment, Qin Ruoying completely fit this description. So in terms of scientific theory, she was already dead. And this was what Qin couldn't figure out at all. It wasn't an exaggeration to say, even if the entire human race died, Qin Ruoying couldn't die. Not to mention that Qin Ruoying's cultivation had already reached the diviner level, and she was immune to all kinds of poisons. Moreover, she had Qin, a high-level immortal cultivator, by her side to take care of her. Her heartbeat had stopped, right? Then let the heart beat again. Her blood had stopped flowing? Then let the blood flow again. Qin tried to use his true essence to forcefully awaken Qin Ruoying's body. This method was indeed effective. Qin Ruoying's heart began to beat slowly, and her breathing gradually stabilized. But once Qin withdrew his true essence, Qin Ruoying's body immediately stopped functioning like a machine that had lost power. Everything was because her soul had dissipated. Qin Ruoying didn't condense a golden core, and she didn't have yuanying. The dissipation of her soul meant that she was completely dead, and even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to save her. Yingying died just like that? Qin stared blankly at his lover's face. In a trance. He actually remembered the bits and pieces of their past. Since Zhonghai University, the two of them had known each other and loved each other. Although they didn't verbally promise to grow old together, they both hid that promise deep in their hearts. Please take care of me for the rest of my life. Except for Qin's sudden disappearance for 5 years, the two of them hadn't experienced many storms in their relationship. Qin returned from the heavenly jade realm after a long and arduous journey. What welcomed him was the precious baby that Yingying had left behind for him, Qin Nian. My name is Qin Nian. You can call me Nian Nian. Qin Nian, Qin Nian. He was filled with longing. Later on, Qin took Nian Nian to look for Qin Ruoying all over the world. When the two met again after 500 years, Yingying directly gave him a slap in the face. At the same time, she also said her wish, may you leave for half your life, and return as a young man. How could there be no twists and turns in life? However, from the moment the family of 3 reunited, all the hardships Qin had experienced had turned into dust, swept into the garbage heap by him. Qin had no attachment to the past because the future was right beside him. Undying love was not something that could be proven by martyrdom. A heart full of love was not something that could only be heard when it was always on the tip of the tongue. The highest level of love, actually, it was just that old saying, holding your hand, growing old with you. That was all. If you win, I am willing to accompany you to rule the world. If you lose, I am willing to accompany you to make a comeback. When I rule the world, I will spread 10 miles of red dowry. I am willing to use 10 miles of red dowry as a gift, and I am willing to use the world as a betrothal gift. Are you willing to rule the world, and spend the rest of your life with me? She did not strive for the world, so Ying accompanied him in a small tea house by Ho-Hai. When she had nothing to do, she would flip through books, take care of the children, and watch the flowers bloom and wilt in front of the courtyard with her lover. She would gaze at the clouds in the sky. Was there anything more blissful in the world than this? She could answer with absolute certainty, absolutely not. But now, his happy life had completely turned into bubbles. Thinking of this, she could not help but suddenly wake up from his memories. Only then did he realize that his face was already covered in tears. He gently lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Only then did he hold his lover's hand and solemnly promise, "Ying, wait for me." There was no need to say more with just these 4 words. Even if I can't reincarnate in this life, I will still create havoc in the underworld and strike your name from the book of life and death. The little fellow stood in the courtyard with a blank face. Where did Daddy run off to? She looked around and did not see Qinshi's figure. Carrying her small bag, she eagerly ran towards the west wing. But just as she was about to step on the stairs, an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. Bai Hong. Tell me. What is going on? The little fellow was startled by this thunderous roar and almost fell to the ground. If it were not for the big cat's quick-wittedness and supported her from behind, this little fellow would probably have fallen to the ground and rolled several times. The little fellow was still in a state of shock. Before she could regain her senses, she suddenly felt a strong gust of wind blowing from behind. The cold wind burrowed into the little fellow's back and immediately made her shiver. She hurriedly looked back and found that Uncle Bai, who was still in a daze in the courtyard just now, was nowhere to be seen. The little fellow was frightened by this strange atmosphere and carried the big cat directly into the west wing. At the same time, she did not forget to shout, "Daddy? Daddy? Where are you?" Daddy is in the sky. Because the little fellow was in the courtyard just now, Qinshi was furious and directly grabbed Bai Hong's neck and lifted him into the sky. Cough, 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 I don't know either. Everything was fine just now, but suddenly there was no breath. Bai Hong struggled to reply. This time, he was really sitting at home, but the trouble came from the sky. Bai Hong was, after all, a divine general. Although his cultivation was not even a tenth of it, his 5 senses were still very sharp. Just now, he was meditating in the room to heal his wounds when he suddenly discovered that there was no breath in the west wing. He wanted to go in to check on the situation, but was blocked by the restrictions set up by Qinshi, so he could only wait in the courtyard for Qinshi to return. It was fine if Qinshi did not come back. But this time, he had almost lost his life. In reality, Qinshi also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Bai Hong. He even guessed that this definitely had something to do with the spirit mirror. Otherwise, who in this world would be able to cause Ying's soul to scatter without a sound? I'll tell you. If anything happens to Ying, I'll definitely bury your Tiandu with her. Qinshi was like an enraged lion, roaring at Bai Hong. Without waiting for Bai Hong to explain, he directly dragged Bai Hong and flew toward the Pacific Ocean. Although Bai Hong was not afraid of death, Qin Ruoying's current situation clearly had something to do with Tiandu, so he more or less felt that he could not face Qinshi. So, Bai Hong obediently kept his mouth shut, waiting to see what Qinshi wanted to do next. Qinshi was angry, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Since Ying's soul had dissipated, the most important thing now was not to directly find her soul, but to find a way to protect Ying's physical body. Qinshi could not stay by Qin Ruoying's side at all times to help her maintain her physical body, so he urgently needed a magic treasure now, and that was Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. Therefore, after arriving at the deep-sea cave, Qinshi frantically poured his vital essence into the large ice block that sealed Shui Xiang. As long as Shui Xiang's injuries were slightly relieved, her frozen state would naturally be lifted. Under Qinshi's continuous pouring of vital essence, the ice block gradually melted, and Shui Xiang suddenly fell from it. During this period of time, Shui Xiang had been in a state of suspended animation, so she did not know what happened outside. Therefore, the moment she woke up, she directly launched an attack at Qinshi. Shui Xiang, stop! Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly shouted to stop. But Qinshi's action was much faster than his voice. Shui Xiang did not even use the first move, and Qinshi had already inserted countless spirit needles into her body. You! Shui Xiang's almond-shaped eyes widened, and after glaring at Qinshi fiercely, her body completely softened. At this time, Bai Hong on the side let out a long sigh of relief. He was not afraid of death, but he was very afraid of his junior brothers and sisters dying for no reason. Fortunately, Qinshi did not intend to take her life. Take her, let's go. Qinshi grabbed the blue wave's silk gauze, left a sentence coldly, and turned to walk out of the cave. Hearing this, Bai Hong hurriedly helped Shui Xiang up from the ground, and then followed Qinshi's pace. Looking at the man in front of him who was silent on the surface, but his heart was filled with indignation. Bai Hong knew. Chapter 408. After leaving the cave in the deep sea, Qinshi did not rush back to Shangjing immediately. Instead, he flew to Daiyu Island. He had no choice. After all, Bai Hong did not know anything about it. Furthermore, the divine gate had not opened for a long time. Even if Qinshi wanted to go to Heaven Capital, there was no way in. Therefore, he could only pin his hopes on Jiang Yan. He wanted to see if he could find a better solution from Jiang Yan. Therefore, Qinshi led Bai Hong and Shui Xiang straight to Daiyu Island. As soon as they got close to Daiyu Island, Qinshi suddenly realized that Daiyu Island's mountain guarding formation had become stronger. Previously, this heavenly dipper array was simply dispensable. Even Wushu could easily break it, let alone him. After not being here for a while, this formation had been strengthened by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Even if Qinshi wanted to break the formation, he would have to spend a long time outside. Seeing this, Qinshi suddenly had a guess in her heart: Jiang Yan was probably afraid of Wushu. That was why he strengthened the mountain guarding formation to prevent the same tragedy from happening again. Out of politeness, Qinshi did not choose to break the formation by force. Instead, he waited patiently outside. He did not have to wait for long before the formation slowly opened. Ha 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 ha, Mr. Chen, how have you been? I wonder why you've come all the way to Daiyu Island today. Before Jiang Yan even arrived, the enthusiastic greeting rang through the air above Daiyu Island. Hearing this, Qinshi smiled and replied, I'm sorry for coming uninvited. No, I haven't seen you for a few days. I really miss your elegance. Please follow me into the house for a chat, Mr. Chen. A white light flashed and Jiang Yan appeared in front of Qinshi. Seeing his warm and welcoming face, Qinshi smiled and greeted him politely. At this time, Jiang Yan's gaze landed on Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. Who are these two? Qinshi knew that Jiang Yan had a grudge against Tiandu, so he deliberately concealed it. They're my friends. They came with me to visit Daiyu Island. Oh, so that's how it is. Please come in. Jiang Yan laughed and made an inviting gesture to the 3 of them, then he took the lead to fly to serene Afterglow Peak. Qinshi thought that he had deceived Jiang Yan, but he did not know that Jiang Yan had already known everything about Tiandu. With just a glance, he had already determined the identities of Bai Hong and Shui Xiang. However, with this old fox's shrewdness, how could he be easily seen through by Qinshi when he was caught off guard? Therefore, the old man pretended that he didn't see anything and led the way. Qinshi followed behind Jiang Yan. In the process of flying to serene Afterglow Peak, he suddenly realized that the atmosphere of Daiyu Island was very different from before. Previously, Daiyu Island was like a paradise. The Jiang clan lived a simple life where they worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. If they wanted to cultivate, the clan would provide cultivation methods. If they were not interested in cultivation, the clan would not force them. After all, this was a large clan with a population of tens of thousands. The clan leader could not possibly require everyone to cultivate. But now, Diyu Island was like a frontline military camp. From the elderly in their 70s to the children of 4 or 5 years old, all of them were cultivating hard on the drill ground. Jiang Yan noticed Chen Shi's gaze, so he took the initiative to explain. The previous battle caused the Jiang clan to suffer heavy losses. The Jiang clan originally wanted to stand aloof from worldly affairs, but Tiandu was so aggressive. How can any egg remain intact when the nest is overturned? The clan members' fighting spirit has been aroused because of this. Speaking of which, it can be considered a good thing. Hearing this, Chen Shi nodded. He did not think too much about it. He was even considering whether to inform Jiang Yan of the news of Wu Shu's death. In fact, one could not blame Chen Shi for being fooled by Jiang Yan. After all, he could not read minds. Jiang Yan didn't show the slightest bit of hostility towards Chen Shi, not even a little bit. Jiang Yan kept showing goodwill to Chen Shi, from his words to his actions. For example, the Adumbra flower. If not for Jiang Yan's free supply, Qin Ruoying would not have been able to ascend to the diviner level. In the end, Chen Shi still owed Jiang Yan a favor. Jiang Yan led Chen Shi to the Jiang clan's ancestral hall. This place was where the ancestors were worshipped. At the same time, it was also where the Jiang clan received important guests. Previously, Jiang Yuankui was in charge of the ancestral hall. Now that Jiang Yan had come out of seclusion, Jiang Yuankui naturally stepped down as the clan leader. Chen Shi looked around and realized that there was no one around the ancestral hall. He did not know if it was an illusion. Chen Shi felt that the atmosphere on Diyu Island was a little strange. However, he could not pinpoint exactly what was strange about it. After all, in order to prevent Chen Shi from sensing that something was amiss, the possessed Jiang clan members had all retreated to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only Jiang Yan was left to receive him. Seeing that Chen Shi was constantly looking around, Jiang Yan did not wait for him to speak. He directly asked, "Mr. Chen, you came to the island this time because of the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, right?" As soon as he said that, Chen Shi's attention was immediately drawn back. He quickly asked, "Sir, do you know something?" "Actually, long before you came to the island, I already predicted that you would come to Diyu Island today." At this point, Jiang Yan deliberately paused. Then, he sighed and said, "The Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu is truly pitiful. Actually, I already received the news just now, not only your wife, but also the other Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu who are still alive. Even the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu who is over 30 years old and has already stepped down. At the same time, their souls have been scattered." As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Yan stole a glance at Chen Shi. However, he saw that Chen Shi's face was terrifyingly gloomy. It was as if water was about to drip out of it. Seeing that, Jiang Yan could not help but feel secretly happy. Seeing that Chen Shi did not seem to understand the reason behind this, Jiang Yan pretended to sigh deeply. Then, he turned around and walked to the back of the ancestral hall. He took out an ancient book. This is the record of the divine gate that the Jiang family's ancestors wrote. Originally, it was not supposed to be read by an outsider. However, this concerns your wife, so I'll make an exception this time. "Sir, please read it yourself." Jiang Yan directly handed the ancient book to Chen Shi. After that, Chen Shi began to read 10 lines at a time. The first half of the ancient book was about how the Jiang family became a sinner. Chen Shi was not interested in this at all, so he directly flipped to the back. When it came to the Tai Ching sacred ancestor, he began to read word by word seriously. As for the origin of the divine gate, Chen Shi had already learned more or less from Jiang Yan and Bai Hong. The ancient book only made further additions. However, these were not important. There was only one important thing in Chen Shi's eyes, and that was, the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu. The reason why the Jiang family did not have the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was actually because of this ancient book. Perhaps it was because the Jiang family's ancestors and the Tai Ching sacred ancestor were enemies, so the ancient book unceremoniously pointed out that the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was a backup plan left by the Tai Ching sacred ancestor for Tiandu. Back then, the sacred ancestor sacrificed Xian Nu's soul to lead the ancient immortal cultivators to the great world. However, the great world was only a small plane, far inferior to the large plane that Earth itself was in. Therefore, the sacred ancestor promised, as long as the descendants of sinners reached the celestial realm, they could ascend to the great world. The purpose was to let the sinners of the lower realm provide an endless supply of Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu for Tiandu. As long as the Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu was not cut off, then the ancient immortal cultivators could once again build a soul bridge and return to Earth. This had to be mentioned, only when the tide surged could Tiandu use the soul mirror to open the divine gate, allowing the celestials to ascend. This gate relied purely on the power of the tide to open, so only a few people could enter at a time. The higher the cultivation of the person who passed through the gate, the more difficult it would be to pass through the gate. It was like a giant trying to force his way into a dwarf's house. His huge body would naturally be stuck in the door frame. Unless the giant comprehended the true meaning of the word void, he would be able to open a new gate on his own. Otherwise, he could only obediently wait outside the gate. The reason why heavenly venerable wondrous spells could come to the lower realm was entirely because of the cultivation technique he practiced. He could pass through the divine gate with his clone, so he could bring Wushu to the lower realm to check out the situation. Chen Shi quickly finished reading the contents of the ancient book. However, after reading it, his brows furrowed tightly. If that's the case, Yingying's soul didn't dissipate for no reason, but was forcibly taken away by the soul mirror? Using the soul mirror to take away Xian Nu's soul and build a soul bridge that can allow millions of people to cross the two realms at the same time, in other words. Chapter 409. Building the soul bridge and opening the heaven gate. Returning to the human realm. Chen Shi wasn't very concerned about this. He only cared about one thing, and that was the soul mirror. According to ancient records, once the sky-bearing mirror was fully activated, the sky-bearing mirror would be activated. Then, the 5 holy temples in the lower realm and the 13 soul-amassing cauldrons in the various branches would be activated at the same time. From there, they would build a super-large teleportation formation across the two realms, the so-called Soul Bridge. Soul Bridge? More accurately speaking, the Soul Bridge should be called the Bridge of Forgetfulness, right? The river of forgetfulness beside the bridge of forgetfulness. Ancient cultivators walked leisurely on the bridge, but the river of forgetfulness beneath the bridge flowed with the blood and vengeful souls of the Siming Xian Nu. In reality, there were no special requirements to become the Siming Xian Nu. All one had to do was be a woman. As the Siming Xian Nu gradually became a symbol of status, a series of additional requirements were added to the land of legacy in the lower realm. Of course, the Siming Xian knew that everyone in the village respected was actually just a stepping stone for the ancient cultivators to cross the river. The moment they became the Siming Xian Nu, their souls were already offered to the soul-amassing cauldron. Even after death, their remnant souls would automatically fly into the soul-amassing cauldron and be stored in the cauldron as souls. It was only then that the Siming Xian Nu would truly usher in their tragic lives. Because their souls hadn't perished, they would instead endure endless torment and burning in the soul-amassing cauldron until the soul mirror opened. Only then would they truly be liberated. Turning to ashes was a form of liberation. Chen Shi returned the ancient book to Jiang Yan. Then, without saying a word, he cupped his hands and thanked Jiang Yan. Then, he silently turned and walked out of the Jiang clan ancestral hall. Bai Hong had been waiting outside. When she saw Chen Shi come out, she immediately approached him to ask about the situation. But he didn't expect that Chen Shi would grab him and Shui Xiang and fly straight back to Shangjing. As soon as Chen Shi left, Jiang Yan followed behind. However, by the time he looked up, Chen Shi's figure had completely disappeared from the sky above Daiyu Island. Seeing this, the corners of Jiang Yan's mouth immediately curled up into a meaningful smile. Chen Shi flew very quickly and returned to Shangjing in the blink of an eye. This time, he didn't let Bai Hong and Shui Xiang enter the house. Instead, he casually threw them into the alley and used his true essence to control them. Chen Shi had left so suddenly that the little girl couldn't find her father after looking around the yard, so she ran to the room to watch TV. One had to know that although Qin did not waste much time on the road. But this time, he was looking for Shui Xiang and Jiang Yan, so Qin wasted more than an hour. The sky had completely darkened. Under the dim night sky, the small bar by the beach was bustling again. Only this courtyard that used to be bustling with noise and excitement, at this moment, it was still deserted. Even the lights in the courtyard were not turned on. The little girl had been hungry for a long time. However, even though her stomach was growling, she didn't cry for her father. Instead, she quietly curled up in a corner of the sofa. In such a big house, only the big cat was still by her side. "Big cat, do you know where Daddy went?" Meow meow meow, the big cat let out a series of sweet noises. As if to comfort the little girl, the big cat moved closer to her, then stretched out its head and rubbed against her leg. "Big cat, are you hungry?" "I'm hungry too." As she spoke, the little girl rubbed her little belly. She didn't cultivate, so naturally, she didn't know how to fast. The feeling of being hungry was something she had never experienced before. "Daddy's not at home, so we can't run around. We have to be good at home and wait for Daddy to come back and make us delicious food." The little girl hugged the big cat in her arms, then as if to cheer herself up, she pouted and said these words of self-encouragement. Although she said this, the little girl still looked back at Qin Ruoying from time to time, then turned her head to look out the window. It was pitch black outside. Only the sound of the cold wind blowing could be heard. Because of this, a sense of confusion that she had never felt before appeared in her big, bright eyes. Where did Daddy go? The little girl waited bitterly. Finally, Qin arrived home. As soon as he stepped into the courtyard, Qin found that the house was dark, so he used his inner energy to turn on all the lights. In an instant, the lights were brightly lit, flowing with light and color. Qin Ruoying was bedridden, so his sister-in-law naturally couldn't escape this calamity. Xiao Yuan went home for the holidays, while his father-in-law was still in seclusion in his room, unaware of the outside world. Right now, in this huge courtyard of the Qin family, only a 5-year-old child was still moving around freely. But she was still so young, she didn't even know how to turn on the lights. Thinking of this, Qin's expression couldn't help but darken. He quickly walked to the west wing. "Daddy's back." The moment the lights came on, the little girl excitedly jumped down from the sofa, then eagerly hugged the big cat and rushed out of the room. "Daddy, where did you go? I missed you so much." Although they hadn't seen each other for more than an hour, the little girl really missed Qin very much. On one hand, it was because she was afraid of the dark. On the other hand, of course, it was because she was hungry. "Hungry, right? Let's go, Daddy will take you to cook." Unlike usual, Qin didn't apologize to the little girl immediately this time, but carried her directly to the kitchen. The little girl naturally didn't notice this difference. As soon as she heard that her father was going to make delicious food for her, this little girl instantly threw all her worries to the back of her head, then excitedly rode on Qin's shoulder, smiling as she waited for her father to make delicious food for her. Soon, the father and daughter had a full meal. After filling her stomach, the little girl clung to Qin's side as usual, then pulled Qin to watch cartoons with her. But because her biological clock hadn't been adjusted, before 9 o'clock, the little girl kept yawning. Seeing this, Qin led her to the bathroom, then washed her up. "Wash clean, put on a nice towel, lie on the bed." "Hey." Maybe because she was in a good mood, the little girl even hummed the little song that the teacher taught her. Looking at her innocent and cute appearance, Qin's face finally showed a trace of a smile from the bottom of his heart. However, this trace of a smile didn't last long. When Qin carried the little girl back to the bed, watching the little girl as usual, tiptoeing to Qin Ruoying's side and lying down, Qin could no longer suppress the raging emotions in his heart and tears suddenly flowed out. This had nothing to do with cultivation. It was the truest feeling in his heart at this moment. In order to prevent the little girl from seeing him, Qin used an illusion to cover his face. "Daddy, tell me a story. Just one. After hearing it, I'll go to sleep obediently." "Okay, since you're so obedient, Daddy will tell you too." Muah. Daddy is so good. So, Chin-shi hugged the little girl, and softly told her a simple and childish story one after another in her ear. It wasn't until the little guy fell asleep that Chin-shi finally stopped. He quietly looked at the two most important women in his life. They slept sweetly and peacefully, and nothing could disturb them. Just as Chin-shi had once promised, even if the sky collapses, I'll hold it up for you. I'm Yingying's husband. And also Ninyin's father. For Yingying, he couldn't let Tiandu build a soul bridge. Because the moment the soul bridge was formed, Yingying's soul would scatter. So he had to dare to go to Tiandu before the soul bridge was built to ask for an explanation for his lover. But if he went, he didn't know when he would come back. Because he wasn't completely sure. And this was also the first time since Chin-shi returned that he did something he wasn't sure of. But he had to do it. Chin-shi wouldn't leave quietly, so he had to accompany Nyenyen for a night, and tell her everything tomorrow. In order to save Mommy, Daddy had to leave temporarily for a while. Nyenyen, wait for me. Daddy will definitely come back. Hey, in order to prevent the big shots from exploding mentally, let's give them a heads up. This isn't a sadistic novel, and I'm not interested in killing my wife, but the plot has to move forward, right? I can't stay in the tea house all day, can I? Life has to have some ups and downs. Humans only grow when they experience things. Makes sense, right? Long live understanding. Chapter 410. The next morning. When the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep, the sun was already high in the sky. Because of the orientation of the room, the sunlight shone directly on her face through the window, immediately making her little face bright red. The little fellow rubbed her eyes and then sat up from the bed with great effort. After habitually calling out, Daddy, she then lowered her head to look at Qin Ruoying. Good morning, Mommy. The little fellow greeted her mother sweetly, but Qin Ruoying still did not respond. She just lay quietly on the bed like that. There was no breath, no heartbeat, and of course, no movement. If one looked at it from a secular perspective, this child actually slept with her mother's corpse every day. Thinking about it carefully, this scene was really strange, and even gave people a chilling feeling, fortunately. The little fellow did not think so. In her mind, her mother was just sick, a very, very sick person. Daddy was busy taking care of her mother, so sometimes he neglected her. The little fellow did not want to cause trouble for her father. Therefore, she called out to her father, but her father did not appear for a long time. The child imitated her father's usual behavior, gently pecked her mother's cheek, and then got up from the bed. Then, the little fellow ran into the bathroom, stepped on a small stool, and began to wash herself. Brushing her teeth was too troublesome, so the little fellow directly skipped this process. She took a towel and wiped her face carelessly, and the washing was done. At this time, Qin Yongyan, who had not shown up for a long time, followed Chin-shi out of the main hall. Good morning, Grandpa. The moment she saw Qin Yongyan, the little fellow very intimately went to his side, and immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh loudly. The 3 generations of grandfather and grandson sat around the small table and had breakfast. During this time, everything was as warm and peaceful as usual. Chin-shi cleared the table, and then called the little fellow to his side. Nyenyen, Daddy wants to discuss something with you. What is it? The little fellow tilted her head, her big eyes filled with confusion. Mom's condition has worsened. Dad has to go abroad to get the best doctor for Mom. But it's very far overseas. Once Father goes, it might be a very, very long time before I can return. The little fellow did not reply immediately. She pursed her lips and looked at Chin-shi eagerly, as if she was still thinking about the meaning of his words. Nyenyen, be good. After Daddy leaves, don't be afraid, because Mom, Auntie, and Grandpa are all by your side, and the big cat, Big Head, they will always be with you. Mom and Auntie are both sick. They can't take care of you anymore, but Grandpa can, so I'll have to trouble Grandpa to cook for you and take care of your life in the future. Grandpa is already so old. He's not as young as Dad. He doesn't have enough energy to play with you. Promise Daddy that you'll listen to Grandpa in the future, okay? Chen Shi gently held Nyan in his arms and whispered many things into her ear. He knew that Nyan might not be able to remember it. But he had no choice. He still had to say these words to Nyan. This was Daddy's reluctance and also his parting words. The little fellow was still young, so she did not know what Chen Shi's words meant. She only remembered one thing, and that was, Daddy was leaving. He was going to a very, very far place. Because Mom was sick, Daddy had to find a way to treat Mom. The little fellow knew what was important. So even if she was a little unhappy, she did not cry and make a fuss to stop Chen Shi from leaving. Instead, she looked up and asked seriously, Daddy, how long will you be away? When will you come back? As soon as this question came out, Chen Shi fell silent. After a long silence, he reluctantly squeezed out a smile and said to the little fellow, It won't be long, you know, Daddy has been abroad before. Now that I have experience, I should be able to come back soon. The little fellow nodded as if she had understood something. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she hurriedly asked, Dad, what should I do if I miss you? Hearing this, Chen Shi fell silent again. Because he really did not know how to answer. Should he continue to deceive her? Or should he cruelly tell her the truth? Once he left, he didn't know when he would see him again. Just thinking about it was enough to break his heart. The little fellow saw that Chen Shi did not answer for a long time. After blinking her eyes, she thought of a solution for herself. Daddy, if I miss you, then I'll video call you. Okay? Looking at the little fellow's expectant eyes, Chen Shi finally nodded decisively this time. This was a solution he did not think of. Now that technology was developing so rapidly, it should not be difficult to simulate his image and deceive the little fellow, right? The father and daughter had a lot of private conversations today. They talked from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the little fellow, led by Qin Yongyan, personally sent Chen Shi to the door. She tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss Chen Shi's left and right cheeks. Then she said with a reluctant face, Daddy, you have to come back early, I'll miss you. Okay, Daddy promises you. While speaking, Chen Shi gently left a kiss on the little fellow's forehead. The father and daughter parted ways. Chen Shi strode away and did not look back along the way. But until his figure disappeared at the end of the alley, the little fellow was still waving her little hand in the direction he left. Daddy, come back early. After saying goodbye to the little fellow and making a series of preparations, Chen Shi took Bai Hong and Shui Xiang back to the familiar place, Karakoram Kunlun. The closest place to heaven. Chen Shi found the ruins of the sundial temple based on his memory, then sat down cross-legged in the middle of the ruins. Sitting down, he sat for a whole 3 days and 3 nights. It was not until the morning of the 4th day that Chen Shi finally woke up from his meditation and took out the sound-transmitting talisman that Jiang Yan gave him from his bosom. This was a sound-transmitting talisman that could directly contact Tiandu. It was a rare stock from ancient times. He did not know where Jiang Yan got it from. Right now, Tiandu was preparing to build a soul bridge. No matter how turbulent the spiritual qi in the lower realm was, it was impossible for Tiandu to withdraw the soul mirror that was in use. Since the gate of heaven refused to open, then Chen Shi could only think of a way to forcibly open the gate of heaven himself. This sound-transmitting talisman became the key. Because he wanted to use this sound-transmitting talisman to locate the position of Tiandu and thus pry open the gate of heaven. This was also the solution that Chen Shi and Jiang Yan finally came up with after a detailed discussion. Since the moment Qin Ruoying's soul dissipated, Bai Hong had been reduced to a prisoner again. So he could only be locked to one side like Shui Xiang, anxiously watching Chen Shi's strange actions. They saw, after Chen Shi ignited the talisman, he leaped into the air. Then, under the dumbfounded expressions of the two people, Chen Shi held the flowing cloud sword in his hand, mobilized all the vital essence in his body, and fiercely slashed at the sky. In an instant, the mountains shook, the wind and snow trembled. After 3 days of meditation, Chen Shi gathered all the vital essence in his body to one point. The moment the sword was drawn, the whole world fell silent. Immediately after, the sword qi grew bigger and bigger. Every time it flew up a meter, the sword chi would violently expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. As the sword chi continued to expand, it finally showed a kind of earth-shattering momentum, rolling up all the fluttering snowflakes between heaven and earth, like a pillar that supported the heavens, crashing into the clouds. Only then did Bai Hong suddenly widen his eyes, finally understanding what Qin Shi was doing. He was going to use his own strength. Chapter 411. After 3 days of recuperation, Qin Shi finally slashed out with his sword. This was also the first time he had launched an attack in his peak state since returning to Earth. Of course, the target of his attack wasn't a person or object, and it was the boundless sky. The elegance of this sword could be said to be shocking the world. If one were to overlook the Earth from space, they would be able to clearly see that on the surface of this blue planet, a beam of light suddenly shot up into the sky like a celestial pillar. The dazzling sword light tore through the clouds, and the quintessential essence dispersed like ripples, spreading out wave after wave. Wherever the true essence went, the climate of the area would even change dramatically. The northern part of the land of polar nights suddenly became as bright as day. Heavy rain suddenly fell on the parched and scorching Africa. Even Hawaii, which was like spring all year round, welcomed a strange snowstorm at this moment. The clouds were like confetti in a bottle, shaking violently with the shaking of the bottle. As a result, abnormal weather conditions appeared in various areas. The torrential rain had yet to stop, but the sun had already risen in the blink of an eye. The atmosphere became unbearably turbulent, and the turbulence caused by the true essence almost affected all the flights around the world. In the blink of an eye, the emergency communications from the captains blew up the command towers of various airports. Feeling the violent shaking of the plane, the unlucky passengers felt as if doomsday was coming. Some of the pessimists even began to write their wills. At this moment, how insignificant were the weak mortals. Thank goodness. This sudden change in weather didn't last long, and everything soon returned to normal. After all, Qin Shi was not a villain who had come to Earth to wreak havoc. He just wanted to force open the divine gate with his own strength. He was only one step away from the insightful emptiness realm. However, this one step of difference was like a heavenly moat in front of him. The peak of the divine transformation realm and the early Dongshu realm. It seemed like there was not much difference between them, but in reality, the difference was like heaven and earth. If one were to say that they were only comprehending the laws of heaven and earth before the divine transformation stage, only after reaching the insightful emptiness realm could one truly be considered to be using the laws of heaven and earth. The true essence of the word void was the first law that an immortal cultivator had to master. And it was precisely because of this difference that Qin Shi could only watch helplessly in the lower realm. Even though he knew that the soul mirror was the source of all suffering, he couldn't go to heaven capital to find a solution. The gate of heaven did not open. Could it be that he wasn't going? Qin Shi naturally could not accept such an outcome. If Qin Ruoying's soul really dissipated in front of his eyes, and he could only watch helplessly, it seemed that Qin Shi would never forgive himself in this lifetime. Thus, he had no choice but to take the risk and forcefully open the passageway between the two worlds with his soul formation stage cultivation base. It must be mentioned here, opening and opening were two completely different concepts. The grand pure divine ancestor had built enough connections between the two realms, so Qin Shi didn't need to open up another channel. He only needed to open up the channel that was originally closed. Just like unblocking the sewers, with the sound transmission talisman as the coordinates, and the glorious sundial temple as the starting point. After 3 days of recuperation, Qin Shi had accurately found the entry point between the big world and Earth through the voice-transmitting talisman. That was why he had made such a shocking move today. With his own strength, he opened the divine gate with his sword. Not long after the sword light was slashed out, Bai Hong's eyes suddenly widened. His lips trembled as he wanted to say something. But after moving his lips for a long time, he still couldn't say a word. This feeling, Bai Hong was too familiar. It was the divine gate. The divine gate was really about to open. As expected. The moment the sword light disappeared, a violent storm suddenly blew up on the peak of the snow mountain where the three of them were. Then, an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed from the void. Bai Hong took a closer look and found that although this light was much smaller than what they had seen in the past, the feeling it gave him was no different from the divine gate in his impression. The divine gate was actually forcefully opened by someone? Bai Hong looked at Chen Shi not far away with a shocked expression. At this moment, Chen Shi's slightly tired face finally revealed a gratified smile. This sword strike used 120% of his strength. After the sword strike, Chen Shi was like an ordinary person who had just finished a marathon. He was sweating profusely, gasping for breath, and his mental state looked a little dispirited. However, just as Chen Shi was about to smile, this light door was like a candle flame in the wind, and it began to shrink rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but tremble. Are you kidding me? The divine gate was going to close so soon. In a hurry, Chen Shi didn't even have time to adjust his breathing. He grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and rushed into the light door as fast as he could. The three of them successfully rushed into the light door. Then, this light door was like a broken light bulb. It suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling light and then disappeared completely. Everything returned to silence. The wind and snow once again drifted on the peak of the snow mountain. The whistling cold wind continued to blow, and the snow quickly covered the traces left by the three of them. At the same time, floating Mist Mountain, which was also located in Karakoram Kunlun, but little known to people, Jiang Yan was standing on the peak of the mountain with his hands behind his back. He stared in the direction of the light pillar with his sharp eyes. After the light pillar finally disappeared, Jiang Yan closed his eyes and carefully sensed it. That powerful aura disappeared. After confirming that there was no mistake, Jiang Yan's mouth suddenly curved into a faint smile. Then, the smile on Jiang Yan's face became more and more brilliant. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha 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 ha, back to Chen Shi and the other two. When Chen Shi grabbed Bai Hong and Shui Xiang and plunged into the light door, his vision suddenly turned dark. Like a loach plunging headfirst into the mud, behind the light door, there was no light, no wind. There was no sound. Chen Shi couldn't see anything. Wherever his divine sense went, it was empty in all directions. It was like a vacuum bag, there wasn't even any air here. Thus, Chen Shi reached out and lit up a ball of light. But after the ball of light lit up, Chen Shi still couldn't see anything. Other than his body, there was only endless darkness in this dark space. Where are the two of them? Chen Shi looked around and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Bai Hong and Shui Xiang were personally captured by him and entered the heavenly gate. But after entering the door, Chen Shi's connection with the two of them was completely cut off. Chen Shi thought that he had been ambushed and subconsciously wanted to draw his sword, but he found that he had lost the flowing cloud sword at some point in time. Right now, he was only left with the training clothes he wore when he set off. Chen Shi had no choice but to search aimlessly in this dark space. But after flying for a long time, he still hadn't reached the end. Along the way, there was nothing in the range of his divine sense. There was no other way. Chen Shi could only try to fly down. But after flying for a long time, he couldn't find the ground. Chen Shi thought that his sense of direction was wrong, so he flew horizontally again. This time, he still flew for a long time. Chen Shi still didn't fly to the border. Where is Tiandu? Where did Bai Hong and Shui Xiang go? What is this place? Chen Shi was a little flustered. Everything in front of him was completely beyond his imagination. How to describe that feeling? He was now like a wisp of dust floating in the universe. But there were no planets in this universe, let alone anything that could be called an object. Apart from him, this universe was a complete vacuum, leaving behind only boundless darkness. He couldn't fly to the end. He couldn't see anything, there was no reference point, there was no gravity, no magnetic field, no radiation, and there was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. F***ck? Chapter 412. Chen Shi used to think that there was only one thing he couldn't figure out in his entire life, and that was, how did he get to heavenly spiral? Who would have thought? Chen Shi hadn't even figured out the first thing, and the second thing that he couldn't figure out had already happened. This dark space was like a small black cell that imprisoned felons. At first, Chen Shi tried to think of ways to escape. But as time passed, Qin realized that everything he did was useless. This place could be said to be, there was no road to heaven and no door to hell. Only boundless darkness enveloped him. Qin released tens of thousands of light balls. For every 100 kilometers he flew, he left a light ball in the darkness. He tried to use the light ball as a reference point to find the boundary of the dark space. But as time passed, Qin suddenly turned around and realized that even though the light balls he left behind had become a vast galaxy, he still couldn't fly to the boundary of the dark space. Perhaps this was the true meaning of boundless? After several fruitless attempts, Qin's true essence had already been consumed by about 70 to 80%. There was no heaven and earth spirit qi here. If this continued, Qin would be like a lamp that ran out of oil before they could find the exit. Qin had no choice but to give up struggling. Then, he silently sat cross-legged in the darkness. In order to conserve his inner core, Qin didn't even light up the light balls again. The remaining inner core flowed slowly in his body, and Qin's brain worked quickly. He started to pay attention to the passage of time, 1 second, 1 minute, 1 moment, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. Qin's mind was firm. The endless darkness didn't cause him to lose his mind. But as time passed, Qin's heart gradually became heavy. He closed his eyes, then opened them. 3 months had passed. This dark space was clearly endless, but Qin felt especially oppressed. It was as if he would be swallowed by the darkness at any time. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. Once Tiandu built his soul bridge, Ying's divine soul would vanish into thin air. By then, even if the Daluo Golden Immortal descended, he would be powerless. Qin couldn't accept being trapped here. Because, he still had a lot of things to do. In a moment of desperation, Qin flew up and down in the darkness like a headless fly, roaring loudly. He tried his best to make as much noise as possible. However, this dark space didn't even give him a trace of a reply. Very soon. A year passed. The long period of darkness and the mental pressure brought about by the rush to save Ying's to begin with, Qin's to begin to collapse. He grabbed his own hair with a pained expression, and could only let out a series of howls that were close to wailing. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out, I beg you. His voice was loud and impassioned at first, but it gradually became low and hoarse. In the end, it completely turned into a feeble and pitiful pleading. In the blink of an eye. 10 years passed. Qin was in complete despair. He was like a puppet that had lost its soul. He floated numbly in the darkness, as silent as a corpse. If someone were to approach his body, they would hear his mouth squirming. He could still speak, but he just kept repeating this sentence. It's too late, too late, too late, too late. 10 years had passed. Ying's soul should have long dissipated. Even if he were to be let out now, it was too late. It was hopeless. It was already hopeless. Qin clearly remembered every detail when he was with Ying. It was also because of this that the sweetness of the past had now become a sharp knife that ruthlessly slashed at his heart again and again. Self-blame, pain, regret, sadness, anxiety, worry, irritation, frustration, anger, all the negative emotions of human beings were gathered in Qin's heart at this moment. If it was possible, he would rather die than stay in this boundless darkness. Fortunately, Qin still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Last year, today, in this door, human faces and peach blossoms were rosy. I don't know where the human faces are, but the peach blossoms are still smiling in the spring breeze. He had already parted with Ying once. He had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years, but only 5 years had passed on Earth. Who knew how many years a year in this godforsaken place was equivalent to on Earth? Thinking of this, Qin couldn't help but erupt with an extremely strong will to live. Yes. Before determining the time difference between the two worlds, how could he give up on himself? Before the moment the truth was revealed, how could he be hit by his own negative emotions first? Qin sat cross-legged again. He didn't want to think about those things anymore. Instead, he began to repeatedly ponder the mystery of this dark space. Since this dark space could trap an immortal cultivator at the peak of the soul formation realm, it meant that this space was definitely extraordinary. Chen Shi directly ruled out the possibility that Tiandu was behind this. It wasn't that he looked down on Tiandu, but that Tiandu really didn't have that ability. Even if the Grand Pure One was alive, it was absolutely impossible for him to play with him in the palm of his hand like this. As such, after pondering over it again and again, Chen Shi suddenly had a guess in his heart. Could it be that there was an accident when he opened the heavenly gate with his sword, and that was why he barged into this endless dark space? Came uninvited? Waiting for him? Or catching a turtle in a jar? He hadn't comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he didn't understand what was needed to cross the two worlds. A huge amount of vital essence? Obviously, it was more than that. Chen Shi began to think about this problem seriously. Even if he was deep in darkness, he had to maintain a clear mind. Chen Shi kept thinking. But time never stopped waiting for him. In the blink of an eye. 100 years had passed. Let's talk about Nian first. Ever since Chen Shi left, the little girl had been thinking about him all the time. On one hand, it was because Grandpa's cooking was not as good as Daddy's. On the other hand, it was because Mommy had been lying in bed motionless. Without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl was indeed very uncomfortable and was not used to it. Therefore, she had to video call Chen Shi at least 10 times a day. Fortunately, before Chen Shi left, he had already made all the preparations. She didn't know what agreement he had reached with Wu Yan. In short, after Chen Shi left, Wu Yan set up a team to deal with the little girl's video bombardment that could come at any time. Therefore, with the support of national technology, Chen Shi's appearance could always appear vividly in front of the little girl. This also greatly eased the little girl's longing. Detective Conan could lie to Xiaolan until the end with just a phone call, let alone Chen Shi who used a video call. Under the constant comfort of Chen Shi, the little girl also welcomed a new year. This year's spring festival was much earlier than last year. February 4th. New Year's Eve. Early in the morning, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang brought a large group of people to the Qin family's courtyard. In order to make the little girl happy, the big brothers and sisters from the various departments of the Martial Arts Alliance used all their strength. They practically treated her like a little princess. They held her in their hands, afraid that she would fall, and in their mouths, afraid that she would break. With so many people trying to make the little girl happy, even without the company of Daddy and Mommy, the little girl had a very happy new year. Chapter 413. Children don't remember things. Once there's something happy, they'll quickly throw their worries aside. Nian is naturally the same. It's just that her happiness is like the tide, always coming in waves. After the tide recedes, there will still be a large beach full of holes poked by stone crabs. It's impossible for the little fellow to stay excited forever. Therefore, every night when she goes to bed, it's the time of the day when she misses her father the most. Chen Shi was still telling her stories in the video, but the little girl didn't fall asleep after listening to it like she used to. She always asks her father to finish one story after another, as if she has inexhaustible energy. Every time this happens, Qin Yongyan will silently wait at the side. It wasn't until Chen Shi, on the other end of the video, repeatedly ordered the little guy to sleep that the little guy would pout and lie back on the bed. At this time, Qin Yongyan will turn off the light and quietly leave the west wing. Qin Yongyan once thought of bringing the little fellow to live with him in the main room, but the little fellow is unwilling no matter what. She wants to sleep with her mother. Although her mother never responds to her, the little fellow has been staying in this courtyard full of spiritual energy, surrounded by all the cultivators above the celestial being stage. Under normal circumstances, the little fellow should have already become a child genius. But she didn't. Because Chen Shi has already placed a seal on her, the little fellow's intelligence has always been at the level of a normal person. Chen Shi only wants to give Nian a normal childhood, he doesn't want her to become a weirdo among her peers. Chen Shi's reason for doing this is very good. Just like what Jack Ma said, the biggest mistake in my life is to establish Alibaba. But before this sentence, there's actually another sentence. I regret that I'm always busy with work and have no time to accompany my family. If I can live again, I definitely won't be like this again. My wife said it well, you're not my person, you belong to Alibaba. The unscrupulous media took the words out of context, causing the meaning of this sentence to completely change. Cultivation is not a matter of time. For immortal cultivators with long lifespans, what did a few years count for? Nian only had one childhood. Why couldn't she be allowed to play happily for a few years without any worries? Chen Shi's idea was very good. Unfortunately, a thought was just a thought. When Chen Shi embarked on a strange journey to save Yingying, the happy life of the family of three was completely shattered. Chen Shi considered that he might not be able to stay by Nian's side to protect her, so after hesitating for a while, he personally removed the first layer of the seal on Nian's body. When she turned 12 and 18, the second and third layers of the seal would automatically be removed. If by that time, if Chen Shi hadn't come back yet, Qin Yongyan would have told Nian the truth. It was up to her to make her own choices in the future. Let's go back to that damned dark space. Since Chen Shi broke the demonic barrier and kept his spiritual altar clear, time had become meaningless to him. There was no spiritual energy here, so breathing seemed to have become a kind of consumption. There wasn't much true qi left in Chen Shi's body, so he could only gather the remaining true qi in order to keep his body alive. He hadn't moved for 100 years. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally, there couldn't be dust. So even if 100 years had passed, Chen Shi didn't seem to have changed at all. The only change was, maybe it was a slight change in his demeanor. Chen Shi had long been used to everything around him. After experiencing the initial anger and despair, his state of mind had become calmer. Before he saw it with his own eyes, he would never think in a bad way. What Chen Shi was going through now was actually very similar to what Robinson was going through, but much more miserable than Robinson. After all, even if Robinson was trapped on an isolated island and didn't have enough food to eat and clothes to cover his body, Robinson still picked up a volleyball to amuse himself. What about Chen Shi? Without being able to replenish the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he didn't even dare to move. Deduce a cultivation technique? Could a mere soul formation cultivator deduce and optimize the Sky Yen divine sex treasured scripture? Try to understand the true meaning of the word void? Without practice, all great ideas were just empty words. Bored, Chen Shi could only recall the bits and pieces of the past. Just like watching a TV series, he watched the story about himself over and over again, and every time he watched it, he enjoyed it very much. Whenever he thought of how cute Nian was when she acted coquettishly in front of him, Chen Shi's lips would even curl up into a faint smile. To be honest, with Chen Shi's current state, his thinking had definitely improved by more than one level. Perhaps, this was also a kind of training. Even if he was trapped, Chen Shi had to be calm. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. After 200 years of darkness imprisonment, Chen Shi's mind didn't collapse, but his body couldn't take it anymore. Because his true essence had long been exhausted. Without the support of true essence, there would be a day when the physical body would deteriorate. Once the physical body deteriorated, then Chen Shi's soul wouldn't be far from dispersing. After all, this place didn't have a suitable physical body for him to possess. Thinking of this, Chen Shi's withered face couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. He persevered for a long time. He really tried his best. If possible, Chen Shi hoped that time here would be much slower than the outside world. Because only then could he go to the bridge of helplessness and quietly wait for the arrival of his lover. Yingying, I'm sorry. At this moment, Chen Shi's heart was like dead ashes. He closed his eyes tightly, and the remaining tears flowed out uncontrollably. However, just as Chen Shi was floating in the darkness waiting for death, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was really light. However, the light was very weak, and it seemed to be very far away from Chen Shi. Chen Shi didn't notice the appearance of this light. As his breath became weaker, the light became brighter and brighter. Finally, Chen Shi noticed something strange. He hadn't seen light for more than 100 years. After feeling the abnormality caused by the light shining on his eyelids, Qinshi's eyelids suddenly trembled slightly. Then, he was like a drowning man, twisting madly in the darkness. Qinshi used the last of his strength to open his eyes and saw that the light seemed to be right in front of him. Light? I'm saved. I'm saved. The moment he saw the light, Qinshi's heart suddenly exploded with an extremely strong will to live. He didn't know where he got the strength from, but his body suddenly bounced up, and then he tried his best to run towards the light at the fastest speed. As the light got closer and closer, Qinshi's pupils couldn't help but become bigger and bigger. He was a little excited and a little scared. He was afraid that everything in front of him was an illusion before he died. Thinking of this, Qinshi suddenly closed his eyes, and then plunged into the light. By the time Qinshi's body was submerged in the light was like a firework, instantly disappearing from the dark space. But at this moment, in this dark space that imprisoned Qinshi for 200 years, a woman's voice suddenly sounded. He can't die here. The woman seemed to be talking to someone. If Qinshi was still here, he would definitely feel that this woman's voice was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Sure enough. As soon as the woman's voice fell, a man's voice immediately followed. This is the reason for your interference? Do you know what the consequences are? I know, it's good that you know. The conversation came to an abrupt end. Chapter 4:14. After Qinshi plunged into the light, a cool and refreshing feeling enveloped him. That feeling, it was like a traveler in the desert who had been exposed to the sun for 3 days and suddenly fell into an underground cold pool. The surging spiritual energy of heaven and earth flowed into his body, instantly causing Qinshi's dried-up dantian to glow with vitality. Qinshi gasped for breath and frantically grasped the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth around him. He did not even care where he was. After jumping out of the light, he directly sat cross-legged on the ground and adjusted his breathing. Who cares what the situation is? In any case, he had to replenish his vital essence first. After about a level of vital essence in his body had recovered, Qinshi swept away the dispirited look on his face. At this moment, he looked like a famous ancient sword that had just been unearthed. Although there was still a lot of mud on the surface, after unsheathing, the sharp edge of the sword still shone with a piercing cold light. Spiritual energy of heaven and earth. How long has it been since I felt such dense spiritual energy? Feeling the continuous accumulation of vital essence in his body, Qinshi could not help but look intoxicated, like a drunkard who had tasted the finest nectar. Then, he finally opened his eyes slowly. After looking around, a trace of inexplicable surprise appeared on his face. I really escaped. This place, could it be the great world? Qinshi looked around and found himself in a strange place. The giant trees in this place towered into the sky, each one of them was hundreds of meters tall and incomparably thick. The ground was covered with dense vegetation formed by ferns and wood tapestry. Such a flourishing and dense forest scene almost dazzled Qinshi's eyes. One had to know that he had not seen anything for 200 years. Suddenly coming to such a lively place, Qinshi's heart was immediately filled with a kind of joy of seeing the light of day again. But immediately after that, Qinshi's face immediately darkened. He had been trapped in the dark space for 200 years, and did not know how long had passed in the outside world. If the soul bridge had been built, wouldn't Yingying's soul have been destroyed? How could that be? Thinking of this, Qinshi could no longer sit still. He didn't even bother to replenish his true essence and directly flew into the air above the dense forest, preparing to capture someone to ask about the situation. If Yingying was fine, that would be fine. If anything happened to Yingying, he would have to fight to the death with Tiandu for the rest of his life. As Qinshi prepared for the worst, he quickly flew into the air. However, when he flew out of the forest and into the sky, Qinshi suddenly discovered something. The great world before his eyes was completely different from what he had imagined. In Qinshi's imagination, the great world should be a planet like Earth. But what appeared in front of him now? They were countless floating islands in the void. Just like in the movie Avatar, these floating islands were either big or small. The vegetation on the islands was lush, and they all had a complete ecosystem. In fact, calling it a floating island didn't seem right. To be exact, it should be called a mountain. One mountain range after another floated in the void. After all, the great world was just a small plain in a crack in the void. It couldn't be measured by the common sense of the universe. There was no sun in the great world, and all the light came from the great sun-moon-star formation that the Tai Ching divine ancestor had inscribed on the boundary of the plain. Under the illumination of the great sun-moon-star formation, the great world had a day and night like Earth. He didn't know how big this space was. With just a cursory glance, Qin saw thousands of floating islands of different sizes, and the floating island he was on was considered relatively small. The floating islands were either high or low, and each island was surrounded by immortal clouds. Qin listened attentively and found that there were vigorous roars of beasts coming from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a giant golden bird swept past Qin's eyes. After grabbing a strange beast the size of an elephant from the forest below him, the giant bird turned around and flew toward another floating island. Such a strange scene was really amazing. This, because Qin had just escaped from the dark space, he had a better understanding of it. Thus, Qin looked into the distance and set his gaze beyond the group of floating islands, to a place where even the great sun-moon-star formation couldn't illuminate. There was nothing but emptiness. It was still that endless darkness. Although there were many floating islands, they couldn't fill up such a huge dark space. This great world, wasn't this the upgraded and expanded version of the dark space? If there were no surprises, this small plane should be similar to the dark space, and there shouldn't be anything in it. After the Tai Ching divine ancestor discovered this plane, he moved countless mountains from somewhere, and that was how the great world became the size it was today. Mountains could be moved, but where did the rich spirit qi of heaven and earth come from? Qin was stunned by the Tai Ching divine ancestor's extravagance. Only now did he realize that his understanding of the Tai Ching divine ancestor was too one-sided. This great figure who had single-handedly turned the dark space into a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral and saved the ancient cultivators. What level had he reached? Insightful emptiness? Tao integration? Or perhaps the legendary tribulation true immortal? Qin frowned and pondered for a long time. In the end, he could only put these questions to the back of his mind. After all, he had more important things to do now. Presumably because the great world couldn't produce spirit qi on its own, Qin rested for a while and realized that the spirit qi of heaven and earth in the great world was only slightly richer than on earth. Perhaps this was the main reason why Tiandu had decided to return. For Yingying's sake, Qin had to stop Tiandu from building a soul bridge. It was still the same sentence. Even 200 years of imprisonment hadn't extinguished the last bit of hope in his heart. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, then Yingying would always be waiting for him to save her. Qin hid his figure and stealthily passed through the various floating islands. While grasping the spirit qi of heaven and earth on each island, he quickly flew in the direction of Tiandu. It was a pity that Baihong and Shui Xiang had run off somewhere. Otherwise, Qin could have prepared a battle plan in advance. How did Qin know where Tiandu was? Wasn't this nonsense? The island with the densest spirit qi and the largest floating island, wasn't that Tiandu's headquarters? Qin didn't go near the largest floating island. Because his true essence was exhausted, it would take at least 3 months to recover to peak condition. He had endured 200 years, what more a mere 3 months? Qin wasn't in a hurry. In order to be able to observe Tiandu's movements at any time, he lurked on a nearby floating island. 3 months, Yingying, wait for me. When my true essence recovers, it will be the time when my true essence ends. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 4:15. 3 months passed by in a flash. In order not to be detected, Qin plundered large amounts of heaven and earth spirit qi from hundreds of floating islands during this period of time. After all, he was a soul formation cultivator. Now that he was determined to cultivate in seclusion, how could outsiders easily detect him? The only thing that could attract the attention of Tiandu was probably the rate at which the spirit qi on these floating islands was dissipating. Qin's heart was always on the soul mirror, so when he was not cultivating, he could not help but take time out to walk around a few times. As a result, he gradually gained a basic understanding of the Great World. There were a total of 120,000 floating islands in the Great World. If all the floating islands were piled together, the surface area was even larger than the Moon, almost the size of Asia. The floating islands were not eternal. Once the heaven and earth spirit chi on the island was exhausted, the floating island would completely lose its vitality and float to the periphery of the floating islands. Chen Shi had not figured out the source of the heaven and earth spirit chi for the time being. However, he was sure that the floating islands here were like batteries. After they were used up, they would not immediately become useless. Instead, they would float to the periphery and wait for the heaven and earth spirit chi to slowly recover. As for, what kind of method did the floating islands use to recover their spirit chi? Obviously, Chen Shi still needed to observe for a while more. Every island had its own ecosystem. Apart from heaven and earth treasures and rare beasts, of course, there were also many descendants of ancient cultivators living here. Chen Shi went to a few nearby floating islands, but found that these people were like the Jiang clan, who were holed up in Daiyu Island. They had a clear concept of community, and it could be said that each island did not interfere with the other's business. You're on your island, I'm on mine. Everyone abided by their duties, and it seemed that they would never interact with each other. On this day, after Chen Shi cultivated for 36 cycles as usual, he let out a deep breath of turbid qi. Although the great world had begun to decline, the density of heaven and earth spirit qi was still comparable to when the tides were surging in the lower realm. Therefore, his true yuan recovered very quickly. Now that he had mostly recovered, he estimated that he would be able to return to his peak state in a few days. And as his condition improved, the strange phenomena caused by Chen Shi's cultivation also became more and more powerful. Therefore, although the mountain peak he was on was covered by a concealing array, as long as someone stepped into the array, they would be able to see the spiritual energy of heaven and earth swarming towards them like clouds and mist. From afar, it was as if Chen Shi was sitting at the bottom of a huge funnel, and Bicker was constantly pouring spiritual energy into his body. While Chen Shi was busy sorting out the true essence in his body, a figure suddenly flew out from the floating island where Tiandu was and arrived above Chen Shi's floating island in the blink of an eye. Chen Shi only took a cursory glance and discovered that this person's true essence was thick and his aura was incomparably powerful. He was at least in existence on the same level as Bai Hong. Divine General? In fact, in the 3 months that Chen Shi had been here, she had discovered a strange thing. Apart from the floating island where Tiandu was, he didn't find any divine general level cultivators on the other floating islands. This was obviously somewhat illogical, as the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Although Chen Shi's overall plan was disrupted by the sudden appearance of the dark space, he still learned the general structure of Tiandu from Bai Hong in advance. First of all, the celestial lords of 10 directions, led by Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, were the core of the entire Tiandu. These 10 people were also the strongest in the big world. Chen Shi hadn't fought with a celestial lord yet, but from Bai Hong's description, Chen Shi could basically conclude that a celestial lord should be equivalent to a cultivator at the divinity transformation stage. As for whether a celestial lord or a divinity transformation cultivator was stronger or weaker, this question was obviously only known to Chen Shi after he personally fought with one. In addition to the celestial lords of 10 directions, Tiandu also had the divine generals of 5 directions, who were respectively in charge of the east, south, west, north, and center. There were a total of 36 people. 10 celestial lords and 36 divine generals of 5 directions. In addition, there were 72 Rakshasa lords whose strength was second only to the divine generals, as well as countless celestial lords. It wasn't that Chen Shi wanted to boost the morale of others and belittle his own prestige, but with Tiandu's strength and foundation, even in the Tiandu domain, it was enough to dominate a region. In the past 3 months, Chen Shi hadn't seen any divine generals or celestial lords, so he gradually became a little uneasy. Could it be Tiandu had already built a soul bridge and went to the lower realm? Every time he thought of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but worry in his heart, and was very eager to go to Tiandu to see the situation. But considering that his cultivation had not yet recovered, and that he would definitely not end well if he stood out, Chen Shi could only forcibly suppress this terrible thought. 200 years had passed, and there was no point in being anxious. Therefore, Qin had even prepared for the worst. If Ying was fine, then it would be fine, but if something happened to Ying, even if he risked his old life, he was bound to bite off a large piece of Tiandu's flesh. Since he couldn't be with her for the rest of his life, then he must avenge her for the rest of his life, until he died. Qin Shi's mind was full of twists and turns. When he saw the divine general appear, he was immediately overjoyed instead of shocked, and hurriedly followed him secretly. The divine general didn't stay in the air for long. After hurriedly sweeping a glance around the floating island, he directly landed on the square in the center of the floating island. This divine general was about 30 years old, and seemed to be slightly older than Bai Hong. His appearance was rather rough, and his armor shone with a cold light, looking particularly impressive. As soon as he landed, the divine general frowned and asked the crowd, "Who sounded the dragon's alarm drum?" At this time, the residents of the island had all gathered here. One of the elders seemed to be the person in charge of this floating island, so he immediately stepped forward and replied, reporting to Divine General Qin Yang, "This old man is the peak's head, Fu Ansheng." It was this old man who ordered people to sound the dragon's alarm drum. Hearing this, the man called Divine General Qin Yang sized up the old man. This floating island was called Amethyst Peak, and the peak's head was the highest leader of this floating island, roughly equivalent to the village chief of a village. Do you know the consequences of recklessly sounding the dragon's alarm drum? Of course this old man knows, but this matter is very serious. I hope Divine General Qin Yang can resolve this problem for my Amethyst Peak. What exactly is the matter? Divine General Qin Yang patiently asked a few questions before learning the whole story from the old man. It turned out that there was a problem with Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein. Each floating island only had one dragon's vein, and the dragon's vein was the lifeblood of the entire floating island, and at the same time, the source of the island's spirit chi. Under normal circumstances, Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein would dry up after at least 100 years. However, this dragon's vein had some kind of problem, and the spirit chi it produced every day was gradually decreasing. In the past few days, it was on the verge of death. At this rate, Amethyst Peak would probably be abandoned in a few months. Since the elder was a peak's head, how could he not panic? "Bring me to take a look." After a simple negotiation, the elder led Divine General Qin Yang to the dragon's vein to check it out. It was obvious that the drying up of Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein had something to do with Qin Shi. This floating island was the closest to Tiandu, and Qin Shi had spent the most time on this floating island, so he had cut off almost half of the spirit chi produced by the dragon's vein. Who would have thought that this would alarm Divine General Tiandu? Now that Qin Shi was done with his work, the dragon's vein naturally returned to normal. Divine General Qin Yang took a closer look, and after finding that the problem wasn't very big, he roared at the elder angrily. "Yuan Tianzuan ordered the 5 divine generals to gather at the Imperial Extreme Palace, and you sounded the dragon's alarm drum for such a small matter? I think you're trying to hang yourself. Are you tired of living? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 4:16. One must know that the dragon's scare drum was similar to a beacon tower. Whenever the dragon's scare drum sounded, the 5 divine generals closest to the island had to immediately put down whatever they were doing and rush over to check on the situation as quickly as possible. However, after Divine General Qin Yang's inspection, he discovered that although the output of the dragon's vein was low, it was far from the level where the dragon's scare drum was sounded. What was this? In ancient times, there was King Yu of Zhou toying with the warlords with the beacon fire, and now there was Fu Ansheng toying with the divine general with the dragon scare divine general. One could only imagine how furious Divine General Qin Yang was at this moment. At this time, Fu Ansheng also discovered that the dragon's vein was fine, so he instantly knew that he had gotten himself into big trouble today. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged Divine General Qin Yang with a terrified expression, "Divine General, please forgive me. This matter is indeed this old man's oversight. It's just that there really was something wrong with the dragon's vein a few days ago, causing us to be unable to cultivate smoothly." At this point, Fu Ansheng could not help but look at the dragon's vein with a puzzled expression before continuing to defend himself. "To tell you the truth, Just before we sounded the dragon's scare drum, this old man had specially sent someone to verify it. Who would have thought? The dragon's scare drum had just sounded, and the dragon's vein returned to normal. Before he finished speaking, Fu Anqing looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to casually make fun of the divine general. The goddamned dragon's vein, this time, he was really in deep trouble. Even in a society ruled by law, false police reports could be detained, let alone in a feudal society with a strict hierarchy like Tiandu. Therefore, Fu Anqing's defense did not have any effect. Divine General Qin Yang could not be bothered to talk nonsense with him. With a wave of his hand, he ordered his men to send Fu Anqing to the death row. This was a critical period, and everyone in Tiandu was extremely tense. Therefore, the matter of Fu Anqing sounding the dragon's scare drum could only be investigated later. Subsequently, Divine General Qin Yang warned the people of Purple Jade Peak, then turned and flew back to the floating island where Tiandu was located. Seeing this, Qin Shi immediately followed, turning into a stream of light and sticking closely behind Divine General Qin Yang. Divine General Qin Yang was only at the yuanying stage, so he naturally didn't notice that there was a tail behind him. Therefore, Qin Shi, led by Divine General Qin Yang, passed through the formation and smoothly arrived at the core of the macro world. Tiandu, Dragon Head Peak. There was a very powerful array around the Dragon Head Peak, which was also one of the reasons why Qin Shi did not dare to get too close to it. With Divine General Qin Yang paving the way, Qin Shi was naturally able to barge in very easily. And the reason why Qin Shi's infiltration was so smooth was not because the defensive power of Tiandu was so weak, but mainly because ever since the Grand Pure Saint Ancestor established the heavenly capital, the Dragon Head Peak had been a forbidden area in the entire Great World. Who would dare to sneak in without permission? This was a path of no return. However, Qin Shi did not consider whether it was dangerous at all. Instead, he resolutely barged in. As soon as he entered the array, Qin Shi discovered that the spirit qi on the Dragon Head Peak was exceptionally rich, several times richer than the outside world. It was comparable to the heart-cleansing spirit spring in the forbidden area of the back mountain of the Sky Yen Divine Sect. This place. In addition to the rich spirit qi, Qin Shi also discovered that the interior of the array was filled with an extremely unusual energy fluctuation. Qin Shi had never seen such a fluctuation before, so he frowned and sensed for a while before a guess gradually formed in his mind. This strange energy fluctuation. Could it be from the soul mirror? At this thought, Qin Shi did not care if he had recovered to his peak state and immediately followed Divine General Qin Yang to the core area of the Dragon Head Peak. The core area of the Dragon Head Peak was naturally the core area of the entire macro world. The Lingxiao Imperial Palace. Qin Shi silently followed behind Divine General Qin Yang. But before he could see the palace, Divine General Qin Yang had already landed on the ground and walked along a small path to the peak. Instead of flying, he insisted on walking. Divine General Qin Yang's strange behavior was completely due to the rules of Heaven Capital since ancient times. The Dragon Head Peak was the head of the 120,000 floating islands, and the Imperial Palace was located at the peak of the Dragon Head Peak. Therefore, apart from the 10 heavenly venerables, no one could be above the Imperial Palace. Not even a Divine General. Qin Shi obediently followed behind Divine General Qin Yang and walked all the way to the peak of the mountain. As soon as he reached the peak of the mountain, his vision suddenly opened up. Following which, Qin Shi discovered that the peak of the Dragon Head Peak was extremely flat, as if someone had used a sword to flatten it. At the same time, a huge palace that spanned across the peak of the mountain entered Qin Shi's eyes. This is the Imperial Palace? The Imperial Palace spanned across the peak of the Dragon Head Peak, and the first impression it gave was that it was majestic and magnificent. However, Qin Shi didn't even have time to carefully observe the Imperial Extreme Hall in front of him. His attention was completely attracted by the plaza at the entrance of the hall. This was a huge plaza that was comparable in size to the Zhonghai Gymnasium. There seemed to be some kind of activity going on in the plaza, and there were actually many people sitting cross-legged there. At a rough count, there were at least a few thousand people. However, although there were many people in the plaza, it wasn't enough to make Qin Shi stop and look. What he really cared about was... Actually, it was that copper mirror that was floating in the middle of the plaza and constantly emitting divine light. In an instant. 10,000 years in a glance. The moment Qin Shi saw this Dharma treasure, the name of this Dharma treasure suddenly jumped out from the bottom of his heart: sky-bearing technique floating dawn mirror. Qin Shi silently sized up the soul mirror in front of him. The soul mirror was constantly shining with divine light, and an unknown energy wave was constantly circulating around it. With one look, one could tell that such a phenomenon was definitely not ordinary. However, in front of a supreme treasure, Qin Shi couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust, and he couldn't help but want to smash it into pieces. It was this stupid mirror. It was the one that caused his family to be separated, and he almost lost his family. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but have a murderous look in his eyes, and he couldn't help but want to take it away on the spot. However, just as Qin Shi was about to do something evil, an old man sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall seemed to have noticed something, and then he suddenly opened his eyes and shouted sternly outside the hall, "Who is it? How dare you come to my Dragon Head Peak and behave so atrociously?" Before he finished speaking, the old man raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A golden light flew out and directly shot towards Qin Shi at the other end of the plaza. This move came too suddenly. Qin Shi didn't even have time to react, and the golden light had already arrived in front of him. Seeing this, Qin Shi's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Feeling the powerful true essence contained in it, Qin Shi hurriedly withdrew the aura concealment secret technique, and then, like the old man, he waved his sleeve and released a burst of true essence. Then, a white light suddenly shot out from Qin Shi's palm and collided with the golden light. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 417. The Imperial Hall was the core area of Tiandu, so the celestial venerables of the 10 directions naturally had the most complete control over this place. Although Qin Shi had the aura concealment secret technique to protect his body, the moment he saw the sky-bearing technique, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. That was why a celestial venerable sitting cross-legged in the main hall sensed something strange. And this celestial venerable who keenly sensed that someone had trespassed on Dragon Head Peak was someone Qin Shi had long heard of, Yuhuan Tianzuan. Although they had never met before, Yuhuan Tianzuan's reputation had long been branded in Qin Shi's heart. After all, apart from being Wushu's biological father, Yuhuan Tianzuan was also the leader of the 10 celestial venerables. If Tiandu was compared to a large multinational company, then Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously the executive chairman of the company. One could imagine how powerful he was. Therefore, when Yuhuan Tianzuan casually released a burst of true essence, everyone was alarmed. That golden light came too suddenly. After shooting out of the main hall, it was like a laser that pierced through the entire square. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but look sideways. Just as everyone was feeling strange, a figure appeared out of thin air in front of the originally empty mountain gate. Immediately after, that person casually released a ray of white light under the gazes of everyone, colliding with the golden light that shot out from the main hall. Bang! Suddenly, a huge explosion sounded. After all, it was a battle between celestial venerables, so the few star lords closest to the center of the explosion were sent flying by the dispersing force. This scene was very similar to the school field at noon. Thousands of teachers and students were excitedly doing broadcast gymnastics. Suddenly, the flag-raising platform exploded for no reason. It was easy to imagine how shocked and astonished everyone present was. In the tens of thousands of years of history of Tiandu, it wasn't that no one had caused trouble on Dragon Head Peak Square. But to dare to cause trouble when all the celestial venerables were gathered on Dragon Head Peak. Qin Shi was the first. As the explosion gradually subsided, Qin Shi's figure was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. At the sight of this audacious intruder, some nearby immortal generals uttered long roars at once as they rushed towards Qin Shi at the same time. How dare you! Everyone, follow me and take him down. I'd like to see which bastard dares to behave atrociously on Dragon Head Peak. What kind of joke was this? The 5 divine generals were in charge of guarding one area. Right now, all the divine generals were gathered at Dragon Head Peak, but someone still secretly touched their faces. If this wasn't collective dereliction of duty, then what was? Therefore, even without the orders of the celestial venerables, a divine general was dispatched from each direction to charge at Qinshi. Today, they had to take down this audacious intruder at the first possible moment and give the Empyreans an explanation. Everyone tacitly agreed that the intruder was doomed. But right at that moment, however, a shocking scene suddenly occurred. The 5 divine generals charged at the intruder from different directions at an extremely fast speed. However, the intruder didn't turn around and run away immediately. Instead, he frowned and clenched his right hand into a fist. Instantly, a long sword condensed from true essence appeared in his hand. Seeing this, the 5 divine generals were instantly enraged like provoked ferocious beasts. They couldn't help but want to tear this audacious intruder into pieces on the spot. Therefore, the 5 divine generals each took out their own trump cards. Regardless of whether this fellow could withstand it, the 5 divine generals roared angrily and launched an attack together. In an instant, brilliant light shot in all directions and the void shook. Surging true essence wreaked havoc in the air above the square. All kinds of Dharma treasures carried the endless anger of their owners and heavily smashed towards the intruder's location. At this moment, the long sword in Qinshi's hand also began to dance. The Dharma idol's long sword shone with a green light and shone brightly in his hand. Even compared to the colorful Dharma treasures in the hands of the divine generals, the Dharma idols of the divine generals did not lose out in terms of appearance. Qinshi's original plan was to sneak in and observe. He didn't want to alert the enemy. But now that the infiltration failed, he could only come up with Plan B. Plan B was actually very simple. That was, becoming famous in one battle. Establishing dominance through battle. Showing his strength at the peak of the soul formation stage to win respect and then talk to the 10 celestial lords as equals. Since he wanted to establish dominance, he had to show 120% of his ability in the first move. Although the moonlight sword technique was exquisite, it was not shocking enough. So after Qinshi thought about it for a while, just now, he took out the killing weapon that he had always been unwilling to use in actual combat, the Xuanpu sword technique. The grain god did not die because of the Xuanpu, reed, pin, betrothal. The Xuanpu gate was the root of heaven and earth. It was continuous and did not need to be used diligently. This move was called Xuanpu. With the creation of yin and yang as the root, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams as the form, there were 8 moves. Qianqian was as strong as the sky, and Dui said it was like rain. Li was as beautiful as the sun, and shook like thunder. Sun entered like the wind, and Kan sank like the water. Zhen stopped like the mountain, and Kuan was like the earth. The 8 moves swayed 64 times, and the combination changed. The exquisite parts were endless, and the intricate parts were intertwined. Qinshi was now using the first move, sword-raising technique, sword-raising 6 dragons to heaven, grand universe. This sword technique was also the most precious treasure of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, but very few people used it. The reason was not that it was not good. Instead, it was because it was too good that very few people used it. After all, things like cultivation techniques, just like feelings, what was suitable for oneself was the best. The Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for Qinshi. On one hand, it was because Qinshi's cultivation was not enough. On the other hand, it was because this sword technique was very large and required one to use all their strength. This also meant that the Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for ordinary battles. It was only suitable for a desperate fight at the end of the road. Therefore, the moment Qinshi drew his sword, the entire sky seemed to darken. 6 golden sword lights surrounded Qinshi. The sword hilts were below, and the sword tips were pointing to the sky. Like 6 hungry leeches, they crazily sucked out a huge amount of true yuan from Qinshi's body, causing Qinshi's aura to become much weaker in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that he was forcing himself to look calm and composed, everyone present would have mistakenly thought that he was afraid. The 5 divine generals' Dharma treasures arrived with a loud bang. Qinshi's sword lights also shot out in all directions. There were only 5 enemies, but there were 6 sword lights. Even if each person had 1 sword, there would still be 1 sword left. Therefore, Qin Shi shot the 6th sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was sitting in the imperial hall. It was impolite to not return the favor. The moment the Xuanpu sword technique appeared, who could compete with it? The vast and continuous sword lights were as strong and hot as the sun. The moment the Dharma treasures of the 5 divine generals came into contact with the sword lights, they immediately trembled and let out a series of wang 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 sorrowful cries. Then, under the shocked expressions of the 5 divine generals, the 5 sword lights showed an unstoppable force, and at the same time, sent the 5 grade 9 spiritual treasures flying. Then, they continued to shoot towards their location. Chapter 4:18. Raising Sword Style. Sword raises 6 dragons to conquer the heavens, Great Qian Yuan. Since this place was called Dragon Head Peak, Qin Shi was going to trample the dragon head under his feet today. Sword Qi spread for 30,000 miles. Purple Qi and green robe flowing east. On Dragon Head Peak. Ultimate Emperor Palace. Everyone, please follow me, riding a horse with a sword, singing to the ends of the earth. After the sword radiance shot out, the 5 divine generals cried out in pain in unison. Then, the 5 of them flew back in the direction they came from at an even faster speed. In an instant, everyone was shocked. But what was even more surprising was that, just as the 5 divine generals were pushed back, a golden sword light brazenly pierced through the square and shot toward the imperial hall where the celestial venerables were with an earth-shattering momentum. At this moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the palace with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes with a trace of surprise on his face. The sword radiance seemed to have split the void, so much so that when the sword approached the ultimate emperor palace, the bottom of the palace began to tremble slightly as if there was an earthquake. A battle between experts happened in the blink of an eye. Yuhuan Tianzuan frowned, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. He seemed to be blaming the 5 divine generals for their negligence, so when he saw that the sword radiance was about to shoot into the ultimate emperor palace, he immediately raised his hand and summoned the magic treasure that made him famous, the jade world glazed cup. This lamp was in the shape of a tower, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. There was an inextinguishable golden flame in it, known as the myriad spirits ancient E. This magic treasure constantly revolved around heavenly venerate Yuhuan, so its name could be said to be known by everyone in the great world. However, although this magic treasure was famous, not many people had seen its true power. After all, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, so how could he casually fight with others? Therefore, when Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan took out the Jade World Glazed Cup, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerate Xuanjun couldn't help but be surprised. When they looked at the sword light again, even their eyes couldn't help but change. In their perception, although this sword light was coming menacingly, the sword force was not released, so the 2 celestial venerables were unable to accurately judge its power. Then, under the gazes of the 3 celestial venerables, the Jade World Glazed Cup flew out of the Emperor Extreme Palace and collided with the sword beam. Bang! An invisible force swept across the square, and waves of air that were as sharp as steel blades spread out in all directions. The energy hit the restrictions of the Imperial Extreme Palace and instantly shot out 10,000 rays of divine light. At that moment, the dragon heads sang loudly, and multicolored light filled the sky. The 5 divine generals retreated one after another. The Rakshasa star sovereign was at a loss. This scene was very much like a forest where gunshots rang out. Frightened birds fluttered about and flew away. The originally orderly square had become noisy because of this. It was as noisy as a market. How dare you! Yuhuan Tianzuan was furious. After a stern shout, he leaped out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. The berserk true essence that had been triggered by the exchange of blows between the 2 of them had also completely disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Everyone kept quiet out of fear and returned to their original positions, not daring to make any more noise. There is no such person as you in the world. Who exactly are you? Yuhuan Tianzuan hovered above the square, lowered his head and sized up Chen Shi before asking in a deep voice. Hearing this, the corners of Chen Shi's mouth curled up slightly. Then, he mimicked Yu Huan Tianzuan and slowly flew up from the ground. Only when he was at the same height as Yu Huan Tianzuan did Chen Shi reply with a calm expression, "This humble one is Chen Shi, from the lower realms." As soon as these words came out, everyone, including Yu Huan Tianzuan, was shocked. Tiandu was extremely particular about rules. As long as a celestial master was present, no one was allowed to make the slightest noise. It was precisely because of this that no matter how shocked the divine generals were, they were like wooden men standing in the square in a daze, silent and looking straight ahead. Lower realms? How is that possible? Yu Huan Tianzuan muttered to himself. Then, he suddenly opened his right hand and called the jade Huan glazed cup over again. In the probing exchange just now, Yu Huan Tianzuan was actually at a disadvantage. Of course, it could also be said that Yu Huan Tianzuan did not use his true strength, so Chen Shi was lucky enough to take advantage of it. But one had to know that this advantage was not something that anyone could take advantage of. So, this stranger who claimed to be from the lower realms, was actually at the celestial master level? How was that possible? The first thought that flashed through Yu Huan Tianzuan's mind was that it was impossible. But then, Yu Huan Tianzuan seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and his expression suddenly turned cold. He stared at Chen Shi and asked in a deep voice, "You're from the lower realms? Could it be, you're the one who destroyed the 5-directional sacred palace?" After hearing this, Chen Shi's face suddenly stiffened, and he replied somewhat embarrassedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding." At this time, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanjun also flew out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell heard the conversation between the two, so before Yu Huan Tianzuan could continue asking, he could not help but ask, "In that case, Changli died at your hands?" Changli was a divine general, after all. How could he have died silently in the lower realms? Since this person in front of him had the strength of a heavenly venerable, and at the same time said that he was from the lower realms, in that case, everything made sense. Faced with Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell's criticism, Chen Shi suddenly did not know how to answer. And his hesitation, it also indirectly confirmed the guesses of the 3 Heavenly Venerables. Therefore, the scene that could barely be considered harmonious suddenly became like a gas station on fire. It exploded in an instant. Yu Huan Tianzuan's pupils shrank, and then he muttered in a very strange tone, "So it's you, destroying the foundation of the divine ancestor, cutting off the path of my heavenly capital, Changli, Qingwan, Baiheng, Shuixiang, and my son Wuxiu." The moment he mentioned the 2 words Wuxiu, Yu Huan Tianzuan clearly paused for a moment. Then, an uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. In a moment of agitation, Yu Huan Tianzuan no longer had the sage-like aura of the past. He was like an enraged lion, he bared his teeth, and his beard and hair stood on end. "You committed all kinds of monstrous crimes in the lower realms, and today you actually dare to come to my Dragon Head Peak to cause trouble? Do you really think that there's no one in my heavenly capital? Hateful. Hateful. Since you're bent on courting death, this old man will make an exception today and send you on your way. You little thief, hand over your life." Before he finished speaking, the jade world glazed cup in Yu Huan Tianzuan's hand was like a meteor, drawing a streak of light in the air, and then ruthlessly smashed towards Chen Shi. Chapter 419. If emotions could be expressed in reality, then Chen Shi would definitely send countless black question marks to Yu Huan Tianzuan. What was going on? Why was the development of things completely different from what he had imagined? Chen Shi originally thought that as long as he displayed the strength of a heavenly venerable, Tiandu would give him a high standard of reception. Who would have thought, after he displayed his strength, before he could even say a few words, Yu Huan Tianzuan directly flipped the table and turned hostile. In a rage, Yu Huan Tianzuan directly smashed the jade Huan glazed cup heavily at Chen Shi. And at this time, this treasure that was famous in Tiandu, just now, it fully displayed its true power to the world. Glazed hellfire, a sky lantern. Burning to the 8 wastelands, 10,000 spirits ancient e. The moment the jade Huan glazed cup flew out, this magic treasure was like a Kongming lantern that had been ignited, floating toward Qin Shi with raging flames. As the glazed cup got closer and closer to Qin Shi's position, the fire was so big that it could be said to be burning the prairie and the sky. Because Dragon Head Peak was protected by the array, the fire did not rush out of the array, but raged and burned crazily inside the array. As a result, many Star Lords with lower cultivation were scared out of their wits on the spot, and could only shrink in the corner of the square and tremble. But what made people feel strange was, the raging flames filled the sky and swept through the square at the same time. The raging flames attached to everyone, but they could not feel the slightest bit of heat from it, as if the monstrous flames were just an illusion. Seeing this, everyone immediately felt a lot more at ease, so they all turned to look at the unlucky intruder. Where did this guy come from? He could actually make Yuhuan Tianzuan disregard his status and angrily teach him a lesson. Unlike the previous probing exchange, Yuhuan Tianzuan attacked with all his strength this time. So the moment Qin Shi saw the glazed cup smashing toward him, his brows immediately furrowed tightly. To be honest, Qin Shi didn't expect Yuhuan Tianzuan to be so aggressive, although he had indeed caused a lot of trouble for Heaven Capital when he was on Earth. It was all out of self-defense, so Qin Shi had always felt that. As long as he could have a good talk with Tiandu, there would still be room for mediation. However, Qin Shi's idea was good. However, the other party didn't listen to him and came at him aggressively. They didn't even give him a chance to explain. What happened? You become a victim? The life and death of the love of my life is uncertain. My beloved daughter is still young and has no one to rely on. I went through a lot of hardships to return to Earth, but I didn't expect that after a few days of happiness, I would end up being separated from my family. How could Qin Shi accept this? All of this was because of these damned ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, even though Qin Shi had experienced 200 years of mental toughening in the dark space, at this moment, a monstrous hatred rose in his heart. So, the moment he saw the jade-glazed cup flying over, Qin Shi immediately waved the godly sword Dharma power in his hand and pointed the sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan. At the same time, he shouted sternly. I didn't want to be enemies with Heaven Capital, but you just had to be so aggressive, Heaven Capital, Heavenly Master, using your name to shout so loudly. Am I really afraid of you? At the same time, the godly sword Dharma power in Qin Shi's hand also danced. The long sword swept across the sky, stirring up a breeze like a ribbon. Strand after strand, winding around Qin Shi's body. The breeze blew the ends of his hair and also ruffled his clothes. There was no earth-shattering scene, but Qin Shi's momentum suddenly rose along with the breeze. At the moment when the jade-glazed cup was about to hit him, Qin Shi waved the long sword in his hand. If the sky was divided into two halves, then one side would be a raging flame, and the other side would be a formless breeze. Mysterious sword formula, changing sword style, windy sky, a gentleman should be virtuous. When the flame met the breeze, the sun was just right, and the breeze was not dry. If the great Xian Yuan was a strong heavy sword, then windy sky was a soft and long soft sword. The jade-glazed cup was like a fireball, fiercely smashing toward Qin Shi. However, just as the fireball was about to hit Qin Shi, an invisible net of sword chi blocked it. Just like the moment when a football was shot into the goal frame, the fireball rolled in the net of sword chi for a while before finally helplessly turning into a wisp of black smoke and completely dissipating in the air. Then, the net of sword chi also disappeared into nothingness. This move did not determine the winner or loser. It could be said that they were evenly matched. But it was also because of this, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell, Heavenly Venerable Xuanzhen, and countless divine generals and star lords watching the battle in the square. Everyone was shocked by the strength Qin Shi displayed at this moment. There was actually someone in this world who could fight Yuhuan Tianzuan to a draw? What kind of joke was this? Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to be a little surprised by Qin Shi's strength. Seeing that his attack had no effect, he suddenly let out a long laugh. Interesting, I haven't fought with anyone for hundreds of years, Mr. Qin, right? Today, this old man will remember your name first. Until the next day, I'll definitely not forget to place a memorial tablet for you in the Imperial Hall. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan's figure flashed, and he charged toward Qin Shi. It seemed that, this heavenly venerable, who was usually high and mighty, was really going to fight to his heart's content with Qin today. Seeing this, Qin did not cower in the slightest. So what if you're a heavenly venerable? I'll send you to heaven today. Take another strike from my sword. The jade world glazed cup's flames surged, and the divine general's Dharma idol's sword momentum was endless. The two heavenly venerable cultivators collided fiercely in mid-air just like that. In an instant. The dissipating true essence was like ice blades and frost, shooting in all directions without distinguishing between friend and foe. Many divine generals could not dodge in time and were immediately injured by the qi energy, causing countless small scratches to appear on their bodies. These scratches seemed weak and harmless, but in fact, they carried the true essence imprints of Qin Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan. Therefore, the moment the qi energy entered their bodies, these injured divine generals cried out in pain and hurriedly dodged to the side, trying to circulate their energy to force the destructive qi energy out of their bodies. Seeing that the battle had affected many people, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanzhen exchanged a look and immediately flew back to Imperial Zenith Hall. They took the initiative to close the protective array of Dragon Head Peak so that Qin Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan could fight more freely. As long as Yuhuan Tianzuan did not take the initiative to ask for help in this battle, no one could interfere. Although Heaven Capital was strong, it disdained to fight with many people, so it gave Qin Shi such a relatively fair battlefield. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. It was also a battle between two heavenly venerables for their respective dignity. Although Qin Shi did not come from the great world, he had successfully proved himself with his strength. He was not weaker than a heavenly venerable. Whether I'm wrong or not, I actually have some idea in my heart. You may not have noticed the title of each volume. This is the 4th volume, and the title of this volume is, coincidentally, This Student is Young and in His Prime. Hey, the climax scenes in the past were too short, so can you let me write a longer one this time? Maybe I didn't write well enough, so I felt very bored. Please forgive me, everyone. Be more tolerant of this newbie, so that the next book will be better. 3. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Edition website. Chapter 420. Titles like Yuhuan Tianzuan and Divine Lord of Dawn were just nicknames. Since the strength of the 5 divine generals was equivalent to the Yuanying stage, then the 10 heavenly lords were equivalent to the soul formation stage. The difference between the soul formation stage and the Yuanying stage seemed to be only one stage. But this difference could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth, the difference between clouds and mud. Using the orthodox cultivation heritage of the heavenly jade world as an example, after a cultivator had refined and accumulated their true yuan to a certain extent, they could refine this true yuan to a perfect state and form a golden core. After forming a golden core, the golden core became the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, and at the same time, it was a hotbed for yuanying. It was like a seed that was scattered in the soil. As long as it was carefully cared for, it would eventually blossom and bear fruit. The flower that blossomed from the golden core, this was the so-called yuanying. Yuanying was formed from the transformation of the golden core. During the entire transformation process, the cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls would gradually transfer from the heart to the yuanying. As long as the yuanying was not extinguished, the soul would not dissipate. It was also because of this that even if a cultivator's physical body was destroyed during the yuanying stage, they could still use the yuanying to possess another body and obtain a new life. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, void. If the qi refinement stage was the starting point for one to enter the immortal sect, then the foundation establishment and golden core stages were actually just a process of continuous consolidation. Cultivation was also mainly about refining the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and refining one's own true yuan. In fact, even though the golden core stage was called a heavenly man, they had not truly entered the next level of qualitative change. Only after a cultivator had formed yuanying and merged their soul with the yuanying would they truly begin to undergo a second qualitative change. Therefore, the entire process from qi refinement to golden core was also called transforming essence into qi. There were no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. It could be said that one had to take one step at a time. This aspect had not been mentioned before because those below the semi-god realm were nothing but ants. Divine generals seemed high and mighty, but in Chen Shi's eyes, there wasn't much difference between divine generals and celestials. After all, transforming energy into qi was only the first stage. Only when a cultivator broke through to the yuanying stage and began to explore the threshold of the soul formation stage, would they officially step into the second stage, which was refining qi into spirit. Everything was easy to learn, but difficult to master. Cultivation was no exception. It took Chen Shi 500 years to progress from the qi refinement stage to the soul formation stage. Compared to those old freaks who spent thousands of years to reach the soul formation stage, this cultivation speed was already very terrifying. But even with Chen Shi's outstanding talent for cultivation, after reaching the divine transformation stage, it would be extremely difficult to make further breakthroughs. Because at this level, refining essence into qi was no longer the main point. Refining qi into spirit was the main point. The so-called divinity transformation was to fuse yuanying with the divine soul, allowing it to undergo a qualitative change in form, primordial spirit. Golden core, yuanying, primordial spirit. This was a transformation that every cultivator had to go through. Chen Shi's cultivation had already reached the peak of the soul formation stage, only one step away from the insightful emptiness stage. So what he really had to face now was understanding the true meaning of the word void, understanding the first law of heaven and earth, and undergoing another qualitative change. This was something at the next level. Chen Shi had yet to understand it, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was naturally far from it. Let's talk about the Dragon Head Peak first. After Yuhuan Tianzuan charged at Chen Shi, the two immediately engaged in an all-out battle. The intensity of a battle at this level was completely beyond everyone's imagination. There was no concept of planets in the great world. After leaving the floating island, there was only the endless void left. Therefore, after Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells closed the protective array, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately lured Chen Shi into the depths of the void to prevent the battle from reaching the Imperial Zenith Hall. Without the restriction of the venue, the battle instantly became more intense. Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen led a group of divine generals and celestial lords to watch the battle from afar. This battle shocked the entire great world. Almost everyone was watching this battle between heavenly venerables. The glazed glass lamp was blazing with red flames, and the divine general's Dharma idol sword shadows were endless. Astral winds blew, and divine light fluttered. The void trembled, and everyone looked down. If the floating island's protective array formation had not been personally set up by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, it would have been destroyed by the shockwaves from their battle. And as Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually revealed his full strength, Chen Shi also fell into a disadvantage. This was the first time Chen Shi was so passive in a battle since returning to Earth. On one hand, it was because he had not recovered to his peak state. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the jade-glazed glass lamp in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand. In any case, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the 10 heavenly venerables. At the same time, he also had the help of a supreme treasure like the jade-glazed glass lamp. Chen Shi was alone and did not even have a weapon to back him up. Thus, he did not dare to face him head-on. Thus, Chen Shi could only retreat as he fought. He tried to find Yuhuan Tianzuan's weakness in the battle and defeat him in one fell swoop. After a fierce battle, Chen Shi had a rough idea of Yuhuan Tianzuan's strength. Although this old man's cultivation was high, it was obvious that he was slightly inferior. He was about the mid-stage soul formation. It was unknown whether it was because the great world was too peaceful, but Yuhuan Tianzuan's combat experience was clearly inferior to Chen Shi's because he had not experienced blood and fire. Thus, Chen Shi decided to show weakness to his enemy and silently look for an opportunity. If he was strong, he would be strong. If he was tyrannical, he would be tyrannical. When Yuhuan Tianzuan saw that Chen Shi kept retreating, he mistakenly thought that Chen Shi was afraid of fighting. Thus, he did not think much and immediately stepped up his attack, trying to create pressure for Chen Shi. But what Yuhuan Tianzuan did not expect was, just as he threw out the glazed glass lamp again, Chen Shi's eyes suddenly lit up. Found it. all the threats came from the jade glazed glass lamp. If Yuan Tianzuan had kept the glazed glass lamp by his side and personally went forward to fight with Qin Shi might have some scruples. But now, Yuan Tianzuan threw out the glazed glass lamp, trying to kill him with a supreme treasure. Such a reckless approach was exactly what Qin Shi wanted to see happen. Thus, Qin Shi immediately held his breath and focused, turning a blind eye to the glazed glass lamp in front of him. Instead, he placed all his attention on Yuan Tianzuan. Just as the jade glazed glass lamp was about to hit, Qin Shi drew his sword, changing sword style, kun to softness, even movement is hard. One had to know that the Profound Valley sword art was not a cultivation technique that Qin Shi created himself. It was the culmination of a senior expert's lifetime of hard work, and then through the continuous refinement of the sect masters of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, it was a classic that had been handed down for generations. The Profound Valley sword art was exquisite beyond compare. The sword started from Taiji and divided into yin and yang. The 4 trigrams of yang were Qian Dui Li Zhen. The 4 trigrams of yin were Sun Kan Zhen Kuan. The 3 trigrams of yang went against the sword, and the 3 trigrams of yin went with the sword. When released, it covered heaven and earth, and hid yin and yang unfathomable. The 6 trigrams of qi shook heaven and earth, and the 4 trigrams of qi went against the flow. The 4 trigrams of the sun and moon, and the stars changed when moved. Qin Shi had pretended to be weak in order to use this killer move. Thus, the moment he drew his sword, the surging true essence immediately affected the qi, and an intense killing intent instantly filled the endless void where the two of them were. Yuan Tianzuan sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly wanted to withdraw the glazed glass lamp. But at this moment, Qin Shi had already swung the sword in his hand. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 421. Kun was the softest, and when it moved, it was the strongest. The moment this sword was swung out, an aurora appeared in the sky of the great world for the first time. Looking at it from afar, it was so beautiful and dazzling, full of colors. Against the endless void, the sword's shadows that filled the sky were like colorful ribbons. Ying gently floated toward Yuan Tianzuan along with the breeze. Then, the sword's shadows collided with the burning jade world glazed cup. But what was surprising was that, the sword's shadows were like ripples of water. The moment they touched the jade world glazed cup, they immediately split and floated to the sides, as if they were actively making way for the cup. The jade world glazed cup smashed toward Qin Shi like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, the sword's shadows circled around the lamp and gracefully drifted toward heavenly venerable Yuan. And this was the opportunity that Qin Shi had been waiting for a long time. At the cost of taking a hit from the glazed cup in exchange for a chance to hit Yuan Tianzuan with a sword. A sword for a cup. It seemed like there was no difference, but in fact, Qin Shi had profited. As the saying went, those who were barefoot were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. He was an old bachelor. If it was purely a competition of Dharma treasures, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, the strategy of harming the enemy while harming himself was clearly the best strategy. Therefore, by the time Yuan Tianzuan realized something was wrong, it was already too late for him to take back the glazed cup. As a result, Yuan Tianzuan could only watch as the sword's shadows, which were like huge waves on the sea, came crashing toward him. Boom! With a loud boom, a magnificent scene similar to that of a planet exploding appeared before everyone's eyes. Along with the blazing light produced by the explosion, billions of needle-like rays of light shot into everyone's eyes. These rays of light still contained the true essence of the two celestial venerables, so when they entered their eyes, it gave people a heart-wrenching pain. Among them, those with lower cultivation levels were pierced by the qi on the spot, causing blood to seep out of their eye sockets. Except for the two Empyreans, Miao Fa and Xian Zhen, almost everyone was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The surging True Yuan wreaked havoc in the boundless void, causing the 120,000 floating islands to tremble. The heavens of the great world, it was going to collapse. Fortunately, every floating island had a protective formation left behind by the divine ancestor, so no matter how intense the battle was, it had very little effect on the residents of the islands. When the strong light began to weaken, everyone turned their heads, wanting to know the result of this battle as soon as possible. As everyone looked over, they could see that Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was still facing off against the unknown invader in the distant void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the victor had not been decided yet. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. This was indeed a battle between Heavenly Venerables. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, just as everyone was looking forward to a more exciting battle scene, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then, he pointed at Chen Shi in horror and sighed. "Where did you come from? It's impossible for an expert like you to appear in the lower realm." Impossible. After this battle, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw Chen Shi's true ability. If he didn't have a defensive magic treasure on him, this sword might have left a mark on his body. Even so, this sword still hurt Yuhuan Tianzuan, so much so that his breathing was obviously a little irregular, and the blood in his chest was constantly surging. "Can we sit down and talk now?" Chen Shi didn't directly answer Yuhuan Tianzuan's question. After he withdrew the divine general celestial body in his hand, he made an inviting gesture to Yuhuan Tianzuan, giving Yuhuan Tianzuan enough face. After all, unless it was absolutely necessary, Chen Shi really didn't want to use force to solve the problem. However, what Chen Shi didn't expect was that, after hearing his words, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Then, he suddenly sent a voice transmission to the two heavenly venerables, Miaofa and Xuanzhen. "This thief is tricky. Please lend me a hand and take him down." Hearing this, heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have some concerns in their hearts. It was not that they didn't want to help, but because of their status, they felt that it was a little difficult. After all, the three of them were the high and mighty heavenly venerables of the 10 directions. Now, they actually wanted to join forces to attack one person. What would the onlookers think? As heavenly venerables, did they have any shame? Seeing that the two of them were hesitating, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately added, "This person's origin is unknown. You have seen the moves that he used just now. His cultivation method seems to be more exquisite than the great clear orthodoxy left behind by the divine ancestor. Therefore, I suspect that he didn't come from the lower realm at all, but from somewhere else. This person has a big secret on him. If he can fall into our hands, it will be a great thing. I ask the two of you to help me capture him. Don't let him escape." At this point, if heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen still didn't express their opinions, they wouldn't be giving Yuhuan Tianzuan any face. Moreover, after watching the battle just now, the two of them had developed a great interest in the Dark Valley sword technique that Chen Shi used. Therefore, after looking at each other, they directly rushed toward Chen Shi. Anyway, the 10 directions heavens had already lost all their face. What was the point of saying so much nonsense? As long as they captured this person, they could find a random reason to explain it to the onlookers. From the beginning to the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't want to negotiate with Chen Shi. On one hand, it was because of Wu Shu's death. On the other hand, it was completely because an ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. Chen Shi contended empty-handed against Empyrean Yuhuan, who wielded a supreme treasure. Even so, he still held the upper hand. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't need to think with his but to know, Chen Shi's cultivation method was definitely stronger than the great clear orthodoxy. How could he not be tempted? Everyone wanted to improve, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. 3 heavenly venerables actually attacked that unknown intruder at the same time? Was this a group attack because they couldn't win in a one-on-one fight? Chen Shi's condition wasn't very good to begin with. In the battle just now, although he was lucky enough to win against Yuhuan Tianzuan, he had also used up most of his energy. Now that he saw the 3 heavenly venerables charging at him at the same time, Chen Shi's first thought was to run. However, as soon as this thought appeared, it was immediately thrown out of his mind. He couldn't run. Yingying was still waiting for him to save her. The soul mirror was in the square outside the Imperial Hall, so, even if he died today, he had to smash that broken mirror first. Alright, the updates were not good enough. Even breathing was wrong, big bosses, I was wrong. You read a lot, so of course you know the traditional cultivation realms, but some readers don't know. As a salted fish, I really don't dare to promise how much I will update every day. I also don't want to lie to you and paint a big picture for you. In short, under the situation of maintaining daily updates, I'll update as much as I can. Look, I updated early today, so I can save 300 more words there at night. Chapter 422. Deep in the Void. The three heavenly lords no longer cared about their identities and attacked Shin-Shi with all their might. What was originally a one-on-one duel had now become a three-on-one brawl. It had been a long time since such a grand event had happened in the great world. Everyone hid on their own floating islands and watched as the four heavenly venerables engaged in a chaotic battle. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower than Yuhuan Tianzuan's. They were about the early stage of the Soul Formation realm. Using the Soul Formation realm as an example, each realm could be roughly divided into the early stage, the middle stage, the late stage, and the peak stage, which was only half a step away from the next realm. Although Shin-Shi had already stepped into the peak of the Soul Formation realm, he had never recovered to his peak state. Moreover, he did not have any magic treasures on him. Therefore, when he was surrounded by two early-stage Soul Formation and one mid-stage Soul Formation, he suddenly felt a little powerless. He could barely deal with the attacks of the three of them, let alone counterattack. Although Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower, their magic treasures were also extraordinary. The Jade Huan glazed lamp was already powerful enough. However, if Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's 8-view palace lantern and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's coffin lamp were added, these three magic treasures that looked like lanterns combined to form a top-notch treasure that could shake the entire heaven capital, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Among them, the Jade Huan glazed lamp was heaven, the 8-view palace lantern was earth, and the coffin lamp was man. Similar to the Jade Huan glazed lamp, there was a flame in the 8-view palace lantern called the sky-burning purple flame. There was also a flame in the coffin lamp called the netherworld ghost flame. If the Jade Huan glazed lamp's myriad spirit ancient E was added, then the three most powerful flames in the world were all here. Shin-Shi did not recognize these three magic treasures, so naturally, he had never heard of the names of these three flames. However, his intuition told him that these three flames must not be touched. Once touched, the three flames would be like maggots in his bones. With his true essence as fuel, they would burn him to ashes. The three of them held the flames in their hands and pressed on. Shin-Shi defended himself with his sword and retreated as he fought. Every time the two sides clashed, it was like fireworks on New Year's Eve, constantly blooming colorful lights in the void. Every time they clashed, the energy waves produced by their true yuan would constantly crash into the defensive formation of the 120,000 floating islands. For a moment, divine light filled the sky, shaking the void. What a magnificent scene! However, it was also in this seemingly gorgeous scene that a murderous aura was lurking. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause Shin-Shi to meet a tragic end. Shin-Shi had no chance of winning. However, he did not run away. Instead, he used all of his strength to fight against the three celestial venerables at the same time. He didn't want to defeat the three of them. Instead, he wanted to use the floating dawn mirror. Since it was for Yingying, it was also for Ninian. Thus, without the three celestial venerables noticing, Shin-Shi gradually pulled the battlefield to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. They were so close that the onlookers on the island could even clearly see the different expressions on their faces. The battle lasted for a long time. Shin-Shi also persisted for a long time. When the three celestial venerables once again released the heaven, earth, and man lanterns at the same time, Shin-Shi's true essence was obviously insufficient. This caused his sword to be slower by a beat, allowing the three heaven, earth, and man lanterns to successfully reach him. In an instant, true essence surged, and flames burst forth. The three heaven, earth, and man lanterns hit Shin-Shi's chest at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, like a meteor falling to earth, his entire body was on fire as he fiercely smashed into the square of Dragon Head Peak from the sky. Seeing this, the heavenly generals and star venerables on the square instantly scattered like frightened beasts. What kind of joke was this? These were the 3 legendary heaven-burning divine fires. Just a little bit of it would probably cripple one's entire life. Thus, after Qin Shi's entire body was on fire and he heavily smashed into the ground like a meteor, he was the only one left in this huge square in an instant. If not for the protection of the array on the ground, he would probably have smashed a meteor crater on the spot. This person has a shocking cultivation, but unfortunately, he fell here today. Although he's our enemy, this old man can't help but feel pity for him. What a pity, what a pity. After retrieving the 8 scenic palace lanterns, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell turned to look at the flames below. Seeing Qin Shi's aura gradually weakening, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell couldn't help but sigh. Today, this person fought 1 against 3. Even if he unfortunately fell, it could be considered a glorious death. Whether friend or foe, just based on this strength alone, this person was enough to win the respect he deserved. While Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell felt sorry for Qin Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't seem to feel the same way. Because he had fought Qin Shi the most, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't relax in the slightest even after Qin Shi had been hit by the 3 lanterns. Instead, he felt that this matter was rather strange. It wasn't that he was very clear about Qin Shi's strength. It was just a simple intuition. If it weren't for his pride, Yuhuan Tianzuan probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to deliver a few more blows. The 3 heavenly venerates flew in the air, each pondering something as they looked at the flames. However, at this moment, Qin Shi made his move. Originally on the verge of death, he suddenly erupted with an earth-shattering aura and crawled up from the ground. Before the 3 heavenly venerates could react, Qin Shi charged directly toward the soul mirror floating in the middle of the square. Oh no! We've been tricked. His target is the soul mirror. It was only now that Yuhuan Tianzuan truly understood Qin Shi's objective, and he hurriedly hurled the jade-glazed cup in his hand. Yuhuan Tianzuan's reaction was quick enough. However, he was still a beat slower than Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell. As soon as Qin Shi stood up, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell transmitted his voice to everyone in the square. Everyone, heed my command. Protect the soul mirror. Do not let this person near the soul mirror even if you have to perish. Many of the divine generals were already standing not far away from the soul mirror, so they immediately rushed toward it upon hearing Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's command and charged toward Qin Shi with all their might. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Qin Shi ignored the raging flames on his body and pounced toward the soul mirror. Dozens of divine generals tried to stop him, but Qin Shi roared with bloodshot eyes like a crazed beast, "Get out of my way!" Before he could finish his sentence. The true origin energy that was filled with blood and chi was like a huge fan. In an instant, the tens of original infant stage cultivators were sent flying. Back then, Zhao Zilong had entered and exited Changban 7 times. Today, Qin Shi was going to enter and exit Dragon Head Peak 7 times as well. This was the so-called, where the sword points, the heart points. The road ahead is perilous. Even if there are millions of enemies, I will still press on. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, the mobile version of wondrousbook.com. Chapter 423. Qin Shi had been secretly observing the situation for a long time. The heaven-bearing effect floating mirror had been suspended in the air above the plaza this entire time, and it was constantly spinning like a top while releasing some kind of unknown energy fluctuations into the outside world. From the looks of it, the soul mirror seemed to be in use right now. Qin Shi had been imprisoned in the dark space for 200 years, so he had no idea how much time had passed in the outside world. However, seeing that the heavenly venerates and the 5 divine generals were still on Dragon Head Peak, Qin Shi was extremely hopeful. He could only pray that there was still time. Yingying's soul wouldn't dissipate as long as the soul bridge wasn't completed. As such, he had to take the soul mirror. Even if he couldn't, he had to disrupt the ceremony today. From beginning to end, Qin Shi's goal had always been resolute. In order to successfully approach the soul mirror, Qin Shi had even used himself as bait to take on the 3 divine flames head-on. He then pretended to be defeated in order to make the three heavenly venerates let their guard down. After all, no one would have thought that everything he was doing was for the soul mirror. On Dragon Head Peak, Chen-Shi charged toward the soul mirror as quickly as he could in his entire life. The three heavenly venerates were flying in the sky, and even though they understood his intentions, it was already too late for them to stop him. The only ones who could stop Chen-Shi were the 5 divine generals who were closest to the soul mirror. The divine generals naturally had varying cultivation bases. Some were early Yuanying, while others were peak Yuanying. In short, none of them were weaker than Yuanying. However, when Chen-Shi was faced with these Yuanying, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants, and he instantly unleashed an astonishing aura that was far more powerful than before. Peak Soul Formation Stage. Blood Essence Ignition. Chen-Shi had just consumed a complete nourishment pill refined from the Adumbra flower not long ago. However, this medicinal effect alone was not enough to make up for the loss of blood essence. At best, it could only heal his internal injuries and provide a little help for Chen-Shi to condense another drop of blood essence. Chen-Shi had already burned 2 drops of blood essence before, so this was the last drop of blood essence in his body. Once this drop of blood essence was completely burned out, Chen-Shi would fall into an extremely weak state. If he wasn't careful, he might even die because of this. Did he regret it? He would never regret it. Even if I die, I will not let my heart be covered in dust. One thing to note here is, even though Chen-Shi had burned his blood essence and was ready to cut off all means of retreat, he had never thought of dying here. Because he still had to go home. He would go back to visit Yingying and take care of Ninian. The family of 3 still had a lot of happiness to enjoy. Therefore, he could not die here. Perhaps it was because Chen-Shi was almost obsessed with going home, that the aura he unleashed from burning his blood essence was far more powerful than when he was at his peak. In fact, he was even more powerful than the divine monarch Chen-Shi of the heavenly Jade Realm, who wielded the Tian-Yen divine sword. When a person had a firm belief in their heart, they were invincible. Even though he was surrounded by dozens of nascent soul cultivators, Chen-Shi was not the slightest bit afraid. Instead, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, he sent the dozens of cultivators in front of him flying at the same time. The 3 divine flames were still burning fiercely on his body, but Chen-Shi didn't seem to feel any pain at all. His surging true essence was also strangely seeping with blood energy. In this state where blood and fire intertwined, Chen-Shi was on the brink of insanity. After using brute force to clear the obstacles in front of him, he abruptly pounced toward the soul mirror. The soul mirror was still spinning in midair. Chen-Shi could even clearly see the patterns on the mirror. However, just as his fingers were about to touch the soul mirror, this primordial treasure that had saved the primordial immortal cultivators suddenly emitted an extremely dazzling light. Chen-Shi didn't even have time to react before this ray of light was like a battering ram, violently sending him flying. Pfft! Chen-Shi spat out a mouthful of blood as he crashed heavily to the ground. Chen-Shi didn't stop as he looked at the invisible wall in front of him. He immediately flew up as soon as he landed and charged toward the soul mirror again. It was clear that the soul mirror was protected by a spell formation. Under normal circumstances, Chen-Shi might have been able to think of a way to break the spell formation. However, in today's situation, he could only rely on brute force to break the spell formation. Without any hesitation, the image of the divine sword appeared in Chen-Shi's hand again. It was just a defensive spell formation. Even if the Tai Ching sacred ancestor was here, Chen-Shi would still destroy it. Break! As Chen-Shi swung his sword, countless images of the divine sword appeared in the air. The third technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, 10,000 Swords of Origin. An endless stream of sword shadows rose up like a long dragon and crashed into the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Each sword represented a single collision. When the first sword smashed into the array and shattered, the second sword followed closely behind. One sword after another, it was an endless stream of attacks. The sword shadows would not stop until the spell formation was broken. In the blink of an eye, the spell formation had been struck thousands of times, and each time, it was at the same spot. Chen-Shi was trying to break the spell formation with a single point. Even though the spell formation had been set up by the sacred ancestor many years ago, it was beginning to falter in the face of such violent attacks. How could the three heavenly venerables allow Qin-shi to break the spell formation so easily? Thus, while Qin-shi was busy hacking at the spell formation, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man crashed into Qin-shi's back. Bam! With a loud bang, the power of the three lanterns crashed into Qin-shi's body. This was the combined attack of three soul formation cultivators. However, Qin-shi gritted his teeth and endured it. He was still in the same position as before. The moment the three lanterns hit him, Qin-shi did not resist at all. Instead, he used his body as a medium to increase the power of the spell formation by 30%. Break! Ah! Qin-shi roared angrily, and a crack appeared in the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Seeing this, Qin-shi couldn't help but smile. He didn't care how serious his injuries were. He swung the sword in his hand and viciously slashed at the damned mirror. The first technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, Hidden Void Sword. After exhausting all of his true essence to slash out this sword strike, Qin-shi's heart that had been tightly wounded finally relaxed. At this moment, he was very calm and relaxed. Because he really did his best. Qin-shi didn't look at the soul mirror again. Instead, he turned around and looked behind him. As he turned around, the shadows of the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man appeared clearly in his eyes, and they became bigger and bigger. Qin-shi smiled and didn't resist anymore. He just calmly closed his eyes. Ying, I'm sorry, I failed to keep our promise. Nian, I'm sorry, Daddy can't take care of you anymore. The three lanterns came crashing down. However, Qin-shi calmly opened his arms and began to recall the happy memories of the past. He was very tired. It was time to rest. The only regret was, I might not be able to see you again. I'm sorry, the two women I love the most in my life. There was no end, and there was no messy ending. Don't be agitated, don't be angry, let's talk nicely. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com, the mobile version of this book. .com. Chapter 424. On Dragon Head Peak. The array formation protecting the soul mirror was actually set up by the Grand Pure One himself. Although many years had passed and the power of the array was no longer what it used to be, it was not something a peak soul formation cultivator could easily break. Under the state of burning essence blood, if Qin-shi was determined to run, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man would not be able to easily hit him. However, he did not run. Instead, he gritted his teeth and endured the combined attack of the three celestial venerables. He used his body as a medium and successfully transferred the power of the three celestial venerables to the array formation. With the combination of the two, the array formation was immediately broken. Defensive formations generally had a self-healing ability, so even if the formation was broken, this small hole, which was only an inch wide, would quickly heal. At that moment, there was not much time left for Qin-shi to react. There were actually only two choices left for him. He could leave decisively before his blood essence was completely burned and find an opportunity to return to Dragon Head Peak in the future to take revenge. Or he could fight to the death and use this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to destroy the soul mirror in one fell swoop. Qin-shi did not know when Heaven Capital would be able to build the soul bridge. If the soul bridge was built quickly, then what should he use to save Ying? Wouldn't everything still be back to square one? Therefore, he chose the second method. Instead of running, he resolutely swung the sword in his hand. He, who was already covered in wounds, completely lost the ability to resist after using all his strength to swing the sword. This was the core of the entire great world, and also the most noble place in Heaven Capital. In addition to the three celestial venerables who were eager to take him down, there were also countless 5 divine generals and Rakshasa starlords watching from the side. Qin-shi chose his lover. And gave himself up. After all, the 3 celestial venerables were not wooden dummies. Naturally, they would not give him time to think calmly. When Qin-shi decided to swing that sword, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man once again smashed towards him. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover? Human nature could not withstand the test. Perhaps if the scene was different, Chen Shi would not necessarily give himself up to save Qin Ruoying. But at least at this moment, he still bravely shouted that, "I am willing." Compared to everyone present, Chen Shi's cultivation was indeed very high, but he was not at the invincible Vajra level. Without the protection of a magic treasure, how could the combined attack of 3 celestial venerables be so easy to withstand? He had already taken it head-on twice, so when he saw the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man smashing toward him again, Chen Shi calmly closed his eyes. The 3 lanterns came crashing down. Chen Shi could even clearly feel a wave of heat hitting his face. After that, the dazzling flames swallowed him up like a ferocious beast from the primordial times. Boom! A huge explosion rang out from the Dragon Head Peak once again, causing the entire floating island to tremble violently. The place where Chen Shi was standing suddenly burst into flames. The fire was extremely ferocious. Whether it was the air or the bricks, everything was ignited at the slightest touch. If it weren't for the Imperial Extreme Hall being protected by a grand array, it would have long been turned into ruins by the raging flames. When the surrounding heaven and earth spirit Qi had been burned out, a vacuum appeared in the square. The fire filled the line of sight. Yuan Tianzuan had been using his divine sense to observe Chen Shi's situation. In his perception, Chen Shi's aura was getting weaker and weaker, and he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he was completely burned to ashes. Thus, Yuan Tianzuan filled the square with soul-summoning banners, as if he had set up an inescapable net. As long as Chen Shi's primordial spirit left his body, the soul-summoning banners would directly detain him and leave him for Yuan Tianzuan to slowly torture in the future. Without his physical body, no matter how strong Chen Shi was, he was just a tiger without teeth and claws. When the time came, wouldn't he be at his mercy? It had to be said that Yuan Tianzuan's idea was indeed very good. But, he waited for a long time, and even when Chen Shi's aura had completely disappeared, he still didn't see Chen Shi's primordial spirit fly out of the flames. Seeing this, Yuan Tianzuan immediately frowned and hurriedly recalled the myriad spirit ancient with the lapis lazuli lamp, then carefully searched the square. The square was surrounded by soul-summoning banners. As long as Chen Shi's primordial spirit left his body, it would definitely be captured by the soul-summoning banners. Chen Shi was already in a state of exhaustion, so his primordial spirit should be very weak. How could it have silently escaped from under his nose? What's going on? Where is he? Where did his primordial spirit go? After being hit by Chen Shi's sword, the soul mirror fell to the ground like a broken mirror, motionless. And where Chen Shi had been? At this moment, there was nothing but a charred ground. The 3 celestial venerables carefully looked around. In the end, it was Celestial Venerable Wondrous Spells who broke the silence first. Could it be that his primordial spirit didn't leave his body? Instead, it turned into ashes along with his body? A trace of anger flashed across Yuan Tianzuan's face when he heard this. He couldn't help but flick his sleeves. Impossible. This person's cultivation is unparalleled. Does he not understand the principle of sacrificing the rook to save the king? His primordial spirit must be hidden somewhere here. Perhaps he used some secret technique to hide it from us. Generals, listen up. Today, even if we have to turn Dragon Head Peak upside down, we must find that bastard's primordial spirit. Yes, sir. Following Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's command, the divine generals and star venerates who had been watching from the sidelines all rushed to the plaza and began a vigorous cleaning. He was certain that Chen Shi's primordial spirit was still in the array, so he was determined to find Chen Shi. In fact, the moment the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man blasted toward Chen Shi's figure strangely disappeared. Not only did the 3 celestial venerables not notice anything strange, but even Chen Shi himself didn't notice anything strange. Chen Shi closed his eyes and waited for death. The pain he imagined did not come for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, there was only darkness in front of him. Yuan Tianzuan was gone. Dragon Head Peak was gone. Even the entire great world was gone. There was only endless darkness in front of him. Chen Shi was all too familiar with this kind of darkness. Why am I back here again? Chen Shi was startled, countless thoughts flashing through her mind in an instant. Could it be that he had been in this dark space all this time? He had never left at all? Everything he had experienced before. Was it all an illusion? How could it be? She instinctively wanted to fly up and take a look. At this moment, he suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from his body, along with a familiar burning sensation. Thus, Shi immediately checked his condition and confirmed that these injuries were caused by the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. In other words, everything he had experienced before was not an illusion. So, did he return to that endless space of darkness? Thinking of this, Shi's heart suddenly felt as if stormy waves had been set off. She couldn't figure out what was going on. This place was really too strange. Just as Shi was puzzled, a woman's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Do you regret it? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 425. Do you regret it? In the endless darkness, a woman's voice suddenly rang softly in Shi's ears. The woman's voice was gentle and soft, and there seemed to be some sadness and sorrow lingering in it. And it was such a seemingly simple question. In Shi's ears, it was no less than thunder in the sky. Who's talking? At this moment, Shi was like a cat with its hair standing on end. His body shook violently, and a ring-shaped true origin light pillar suddenly flew out of his body. The light pillar dispelled the darkness, and also calmed Shi down a little. Then, he focused and held his breath, and began to look around vigilantly. Shi was very familiar with this mysterious dark space that had imprisoned him for 200 years. Just like the last time he was here, there was nothing in this place. There was no light, no air, no radiation, no magnetic field, there was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. But the woman's voice just now was so real, as if she was leaning against his ear and whispering softly. For safety reasons, Shi immediately released his divine sense, and with himself as the center, he carefully explored the darkness. But, in this endless darkness, there was not even a speck of dust, let alone a person who could speak. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? Shi was somewhat uncertain. After all, he had experienced too many strange things, and his brain could no longer react. But just as he was feeling puzzled, the woman's voice rang again. Do you regret it? This time, Shi finally heard it clearly. He was not hallucinating, and there was really someone leaning against his ear and whispering softly. After confirming that he did not hear wrongly, Shi's heart suddenly trembled violently. Because, he had no idea where the voice came from. It felt as if a female ghost was leaning on his back, asking him if he had eaten dinner today, and he turned around to look for her, but he could not see the female ghost. How could Shi not be surprised? There was actually someone in this world who could approach him silently, and he could not sense the other party's presence at all? How was that possible? After all, no matter how severe his injuries were, he was still at the peak of the divine transformation stage. However, he was unable to detect this woman's aura at all. He couldn't even pinpoint the direction of her voice. Who is it? Are you talking to me? Can you show yourself? She asked her question towards the void. The woman did not answer him. After a while, the woman's voice sounded again. Do you regret it? It was still the same problem. This made Shi suddenly realize, the woman's tone was exactly the same as the previous 2 times. He felt that she was like a recorder that could only repeat the same sentence over and over again. Regret what? Do you regret it? I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific? Do you regret it? F***CK. Do you regret it? Do you regret it? No matter what Shi said, women would always say the same thing. Therefore, Shi thought about it seriously. He was a coding farmer, so he was naturally very familiar with mechanical commands. Therefore, Shi was very suspicious that this woman should be a reflection left behind by a senior expert. She did not have the ability to think and could only follow the program settings mechanically. If the woman's question was the username, then Shi's answer was obviously the password. Only by providing the correct password could he successfully log into the account and proceed with the next step. Therefore, when the woman asked again, Qin answered decisively, "I don't regret it." He originally just wanted to verify his guess. Who would have thought, the moment the words "I don't regret it" blurted out, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the endless dark space. The lightning came extremely quickly. Before Qin could even react, the lightning had already struck not far in front of him. In front of him was an empty dark void. However, after the lightning struck, it seemed to have struck something and instantly exploded into a large ball of purple flames. The scene in front of him was simply too strange. Qin subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, only to find that he could not move his body. At this moment, the ball of purple flames floating in the void slowly drifted toward him. Qin watched as the flames gradually approached him. He tried his best to break free, but his body seemed to have been separated from his soul and did not listen to his commands at all. One had to know that he was at the peak of the soul formation stage. At this moment, he was like a puppet that was being manipulated by someone at will. Faced with such a strange situation, Qin suddenly had a human emotion that had not appeared in hundreds of years: confusion and helplessness. Confusion and uneasiness. Humans were always afraid of things that they did not know, and Qin was no exception. It was also at this moment that he finally realized how insignificant he was. So what if he was at the soul formation stage? The purple flames were getting closer and closer to Qin. It was only when they were about to touch him that the purple flames suddenly stopped. Then, under Qin dumbfounded expression, a shackled arm covered in scars suddenly stretched out from the flames. First it was the left hand, then the right hand. Like Sadako crawling out of a TV, the person slowly crawled out of the flames along with the clanking sound of the shackles. Perhaps it was because of the spell, but Qin could not see the person's face at all, so he could only judge based on the slender figure and the high bulging chest. The person in front of him should be a woman. The way the woman appeared was very strange, but what really shocked Qin was the way the woman was dressed. He saw that her wrists, ankles, neck, waist, abdomen, ribs, and shoulder blades were all locked in shackles. 9 chains thicker than her arms were connected to the shackles, so every time the woman moved, the chains all over her body would jingle non-stop. Her clothes were ragged, and Qin could even see half of her chest. And the parts of her body that were not covered by clothes were full of terrifying scars. Qin was stunned. The woman's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. He originally thought that the other party was some hidden expert, at least at the same level as the Taiqing divine ancestor, so she could easily bring him here from the Dragon Head Peak. Who would have thought that this woman was dressed like a prisoner? Qin stared at the woman in front of him in a daze, and only a blank was left in his mind. And at this moment, the woman who crawled out of the flames directly pressed her blurry face against Qin's face, and then asked again, "Are you willing?" Chapter 426. Are you willing? Even though the woman's face was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from Qin, he still couldn't see the woman's face clearly. He only felt that his vision was blurry, and he couldn't even distinguish her facial features. It felt like a thick layer of mosaic. Qin didn't know what the woman wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to answer. After all, he didn't even know what the woman was asking. What if he answered wrongly? A bank card password would be temporarily frozen if it was entered wrongly 3 times, not to mention the strange and mysterious woman in front of him. Although the woman was close, Qin couldn't feel any trace of her existence. There was no body temperature, no breath, no sound, and no smell. Whether it was breath, or aura. This woman had none of that. She was like a lifeless, still painting. As long as Qin closed his eyes, he wouldn't be able to sense the woman's existence. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the woman's blurry face would immediately appear in front of him. Are you willing? Just like before, the woman waited for about 2 minutes. After seeing that Qin didn't answer, she asked again. Her voice was still so gentle and soft. After Qin heard this, the pressure in his heart increased. Should he answer? Or should he not answer? Qin was tied to the ground by the woman. Other than his head, his body was completely out of his control. This stalemate obviously wasn't a good idea. So, after Chen-shi thought about it again and again, he asked tentatively, "Dare I ask? What's your question?" "There's only one question, are you willing or not?" "How can I answer that?" Chen-shi originally only wanted to test her, to see if the woman would still ask questions mechanically like before. But he didn't expect that after the woman listened. Her head suddenly moved slightly, as if she was looking at him up and down. Seeing this, Chen-shi suddenly had a guess in his mind. This woman didn't seem to be a simple reflection. Sure enough. After the woman looked at him up and down, she asked the question. "Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover?" "I'm willing." As soon as the woman finished speaking, Chen-shi gave the answer decisively. Wasn't this nonsense? If it wasn't for Ying, how could he be easily defeated by 3 heavenly masters? Chen-shi could be considered to have walked through the gates of hell. Although he couldn't figure out why he suddenly returned to the dark space, it didn't stop Chen-shi from making bold guesses. This must have something to do with this mysterious woman. Since the woman had brought him back from the gates of hell, she probably wasn't just playing with him for fun. Therefore, after much consideration, Chen-shi decided to answer the woman's question first. He also wanted to see what strange reaction the woman would have next. However, what Chen-shi didn't expect. He gave the answer, but the woman did not respond at all, as if a computer had crashed. Chen-shi was depressed. After 2 or 3 minutes, the woman she slowly raised her right hand and gently placed it on Chen-shi's cheek. The arm that was shackled and covered in scars was so real. However, Chen-shi didn't feel like he was being touched by a foreign object. This scene was very strange. It was like the sun shining on the arm, and then the shadow of the arm was reflected on Chen-shi's face. Chen-shi couldn't feel the woman touching him at all. However, his eyes could clearly see that the woman's palm was continuously caressing his face. What's going on? The woman's behavior made Chen-shi very uncomfortable. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as he was being molested. He was at the peak of the soul formation stage, but now he was reduced to such a state. It was really sad and lamentable. Since he couldn't resist, he could only endure silently. Chen-shi closed his eyes with a numb expression, but his mind was working quickly. Everything in front of him was too strange. Even with his experience, he couldn't figure out what kind of existence this woman was. This scene was very similar to how he treated his sister-in-law in the past. Didn't Qin Shueching, who was still an ordinary warrior, also let Chen-shi do whatever he wanted? The peak strength did not understand the world of the soul formation stage. Just like the soul formation stage did not understand the world of the void realm. Even when facing his master, Chen-shi didn't feel so lost. So it was obvious. This mysterious woman in front of him. She might not just be a void realm expert. Thinking of this, Chen-shi couldn't help but open his eyes and keep looking at the woman in front of him. He was trying to find a secret from the woman. But at this moment, in the depths of the endless void, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. The moment the lightning flashed, not only was Chen-shi shocked, but even the woman seemed to be shocked. The woman hurriedly turned her head to look, and the chains on her body suddenly made a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Then, Chen-shi's divine sense seemed to have been electrified, and he finally detected a trace of vital essence fluctuation in the depths of the void. This fluctuation was extremely violent, and it could be said to be, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was earth-shattering. The first bolt of lightning had just disappeared, and it was followed by another bolt of lightning. One bolt after another, and it didn't stop at all. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds and thousands of bolts of lightning striking the depths of the void. The bright light of the lightning was particularly dazzling in the darkness. In each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be a huge wave of vital essence fluctuation. Chen-shi had never seen such an exaggerated wave of vital essence fluctuation, and he only felt that he was so small in front of this wave of energy. It was as panicked as an ordinary person facing the brilliant power of heaven. There was a great terror in the depths of the void. It was like a puppy facing a tiger, or a grass snake facing a dragon. The strong pressure brought about by the difference in realm almost made Qin breathless. Pressure was a very mysterious thing. Here was an example. When Qin faced a group of martial artists on Earth who didn't know anything, as long as he deliberately showed a trace of hostility, the other party would be so scared that they would piss their pants, and probably not even be able to stand properly. This was pressure. This special phenomenon would only occur when there was an absolute difference in realm between two people. It came from the instinct of life, so even immortal cultivators were no exception. Even though Qin had stayed in the heavenly jade world for a whole 500 years, he had never seen such a strong pressure. This big shot who suddenly appeared in the depths of the void. Was he just at the insightful void realm? Even if someone said that he was a tribulation true immortal, Qin would still believe it. And while Qin was struggling to resist the strong pressure, the chains on the woman's body suddenly tightened, and an unknown force was trying to pull her back into the purple flame. The woman tried to struggle, but the 9 chains on her body seemed to be electrified. The more she struggled, the more pain the chains would bring her. Finally, the woman couldn't hold on any longer. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the purple flame by the chains, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand, and then pointed at Qin's forehead. Chapter 427. In the depths of the void, dazzling lightning flashed one after another. Although there was no sound of thunder, every time the lightning flashed, it would set off a huge wave of vital essence. A strong pressure kept surging from the darkness. Qin was in the middle of this pressure. He only felt that he was now like a small sampan floating in the sea, and could be crushed into powder by the stormy waves at any time. Qin struggled against the invisible pressure from the depths of the void. The woman struggled against the 9 chains on her body. There seemed to be an unknown power in the purple flame, and it was this power that restrained the mysterious woman in front of him. The woman struggled frantically. But these 9 chains seemed to be wrapped around the capstan of an ancient city gate. Every time the capstan turned, the chains would tighten inch by inch toward the purple flame. Purple flame, azure lightning. The mysterious woman, 9 chains. Everything looked so strange. But the really strange thing was, no matter how shocking the scene in front of Qin was, he did not hear any strange sounds. Except for the occasional clanging of the chains, Qin could not hear any sound. The dark space was still so quiet. Even if the woman seemed to be howling at the sky, Qin did not hear any sound she made. It was as if he was deaf. Apart from that strong pressure, even his divine sense could not detect any unusual fluctuations. What was happening in front of him? It was completely beyond the scope of Qin's understanding. The lightning flashed faster and faster, and the purple flame grew stronger and stronger. The woman was gradually unable to hold on. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the flame, the woman's right index finger suddenly pointed between Qin's eyebrows. At that moment, Qin suddenly felt a bone-piercing chill. It was as if his eyebrows had suddenly touched a piece of ice. It was so cold that he could not help but shiver. Then, Qin did not even have time to react. The past events of his life rushed to his mind like a tide and appeared in front of him one by one. It was like a movie that started rewinding at 32 times the speed of the movie when the ending was clearly shown. From Longzhou Peak to Daiyu Island, from Shangjing to Zhonghai, from Tianxian to Earth, Qin also reverted from Soul Formation to Yuanying, then to Golden Core and Foundation Establishment, and finally back to being an ordinary person. The timeline was reversed, and the past was still vivid in his mind. Qin was like a spectator sitting in front of the TV, watching his life in a daze. Soon, the movie returned to the beginning. It was the scene when he worked overtime until late at night and couldn't get a taxi, so he could only run home in the rain. A bolt of lightning struck down, the image stopped abruptly. "It's you?" He turned around and looked at her with a gentle gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, his thoughts had already turned 1,000 times. Qin gaped at the mysterious woman in front of him. He had thousands of questions in his heart, but before he could ask, the woman was dragged back into the flames by the chains. And the moment the woman entered the flames, she seemed to have heard Qin's voice, so a faint smile appeared on her originally pained face. Although Qin couldn't see the woman's face, he could clearly feel that the woman seemed to be smiling at him. Finally, the woman's figure was swallowed by the purple flames. The lightning in the distance disappeared in a flash. After the purple flames fluttered for a moment, they instantly disappeared like fireworks. And as the flames went out, the pressure that came from the depths of the void also slowly faded. Chen-shi was like a spectator, staring blankly as the darkness enveloped him again. Everything returned to silence. He could finally move again. Huff, huff, huff. As soon as he was free, Chen-shi couldn't help but start to pant heavily. Although the strong pressure had disappeared, he still hadn't recovered from the fear. Chen-shi forced himself to calm down a little, then sat cross-legged in the void. And at this moment, Chen-shi suddenly realized that his injuries had healed, and the true origin in his body was abundant, almost at the peak. What was going on? Could it be that the woman cured him before she left? Thinking of this, Chen-shi couldn't help but be shocked, and he suddenly had an illusion that he was trapped in a deadly illusion. Illusion attacks the heart, and attacking the heart was the most important thing. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there was no reference. After Chen-shi's strength recovered, everything seemed to return to the moment when he opened the gate of heaven with his sword and fell into the dark space. So he couldn't help but wonder if he had fallen into some kind of illusion again. Everything that he had experienced before, was it all just an illusion? This guess was actually very reasonable. After all, illusion arrays were usually more terrifying than killing arrays. However, Chen-shi immediately rejected this guess. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The pressure was so real, and the woman's existence was so real. No illusion could be so realistic, so everything that he had experienced just now was definitely real. Chen-shi had encountered the insightful void before, because his master was at the insightful void. And Chen-shi had been lucky enough to see the Tao integration above the insightful void. However, even a Tao integration stage senior wouldn't be able to exert such terrifying pressure on him. So, the great terror that was emitting such a strong pressure in the depths of the void was definitely not at the insightful void stage, and might even surpass the Tao integration and reach the legendary tribulation bath. Immortal cultivation, immortal cultivation. This was the real, immortal. Chen-shi didn't sense any aura from the woman. But just based on the 9 chains on her body and the moves she showed before she left, Chen-shi had reason to believe that this woman should be at the same level as that great terror. Moreover, this mysterious woman seemed to have an inexplicable kindness toward him. Coupled with her last finger, Chen-shi instantly had a guess in his heart. Could it be the reason why he went to the heavenly jade world for no reason? Everything was because of this mysterious woman just now? Chen-shi's heart was filled with questions. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out the reason. There were still too few clues. One had to know that this was an important figure that only existed in myths and legends, and he was lucky enough to come into close contact with her today. Although he only said a few words, he resisted a strong pressure. But for Chen-shi, who was already at the soul formation stage, this kind of experience was very rare. So, he immediately sat cross-legged in the void and began to carefully recall the entire process of the woman's appearance. He tried to gain some experience from it, but he didn't expect that when he sat down for a whole 300 years. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 428. In the Dark Space. Chen-shi used a strand of true essence to create a very crude timer, and then he completely went into seclusion. After his previous experience, he didn't dare to waste his true essence at all. Instead, he entered the state of tortoise rest from the beginning, and kept thinking about everything he just saw in his mind. The reason why the woman didn't have any aura on her was that she had an inexplicable kindness toward Chen-shi from the beginning, so she deliberately restrained her aura. If the woman was a prisoner, then the great terror that appeared later was obviously the prison guard guarding the prisoner. These were 2 great figures who had the ability to reach the heavens and penetrate the earth. Chen-shi couldn't figure it out, so he focused all his energy on himself. And what he just experienced also made Chen-shi realize for the first time that soul formation was too weak. So weak that even if he came to heaven capital, he couldn't get the soul mirror and save Ying. He was so weak that he could only tremble and be at a loss under the terrifying pressure of others. Qin really didn't like this feeling. So he wanted to use this opportunity to get close to the two great figures to break through to the insightful emptiness realm in one go. Strength was always relative. In the heavenly jade world, he was the Dawn Divine Lord who oversaw a region. On earth, he was a god who was above ordinary people. But in Heaven Capital, he found that he couldn't deal with the siege of the 10 celestial venerables and 5 divine generals by himself. As for the great terror of the mysterious woman, she was a terrifying existence that she didn't even dare to think about before. The comfortable life made she gradually forget the first rule, which was natural selection, survival of the fittest. She had a monthly salary of more than 10,000, and his life in a small county was too comfortable. But for big cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, what was more than 10,000 a month? To put it bluntly, in fact, he had lowered his own level, which was why he was able to live a carefree life. You have your pursuits, and I have my choices. So Shi's previous idea wasn't wrong. His mistake was, the development and progress of society would not stop because of a single person. Following the birth of a child, the price of housing skyrocketed. Even if they were hiding in a small county town with a monthly income of more than 10,000, they began to struggle to make ends meet. When she could no longer protect his family with his current strength, that would be when he made a grave mistake. She realized his mistake, which was why he was so eager to break through to the insightful emptiness realm. It was the same as when he was eager to break through to the divine transformation realm and step on the path home. Fortunately, as long as a man was willing to work hard, it was never too late. Ren Zhengfei founded Huawei at the age of 43. Zhong Qingho founded Waha at the age of 44. Then there was Colonel Sanders of the United States, who didn't even start KFC until he was 66. I was once dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse, young and frivolous. Now, he's working diligently, and a great talent is a late success. While Shi was trying his best to comprehend the true meaning of the word void in the dark space, the little fellow was also gradually adapting to her new life, without the company of her parents. As usual, the little fellow made many video calls to Shi every day. For this reason, Wu Lian even specially invited a child psychologist from the capital university to deal with the little fellow's overflowing yearning at any time. The little fellow was like Truman in the movie The Truman Show, living in a fairy tale world that Wu Lian carefully created for her. She gradually got used to video calls with her father, and also gradually got used to her mother's deep sleep. But unfortunately, communication through video calls couldn't compare to the company of real people after all. When the child no longer cried and insisted that her father come home, it meant that her heart had begun to close up. As soon as the video call ended, the smile on the little fellow's face would visibly diminish. She no longer liked new toys, and she no longer clamored to play in the ice rink. If the two brothers didn't come to the courtyard to play with her every day, rain or shine, her entire childhood would probably be much dimmer. Toys, cartoons, Big Cat, and the two brothers had already formed the entire content of the little fellow's life. Grandpa was very good to her. Although Grandpa was often in a daze alone and accidentally neglected her existence, the little fellow could still feel Grandpa's deep care for her in her heart. But this care, it was more like the feeling that Aunt Zhang once gave her, rather than the feeling that her parents once gave her. Only when one once had something would one know what it meant to lose it. She began to like holding her phone in a daze in the room alone. Because she grew up, she naturally began to have troubles. Time flew by. It was a new year. Aunt Zhang was very puzzled as to why she didn't call her this year, so as soon as the spring festival was over, the old lady took the initiative to call Shi. Unexpectedly, the old lady was fooled by Wang Chuanju, saying that Shi and his family were traveling abroad and wouldn't be back for a long time. Aunt Zhang naturally believed this, so after a series of instructions on the phone, she completely dispelled the idea of visiting the little fellow in Beijing. Even a snail would leave a white mark when it crawled past, let alone a person. Shi's sudden disappearance also completely shattered the network of contacts he had built before. Of course, for him, this kind of network was actually dispensable. But for Ninian, a child who grew up relying on her parents' network, all of this was indeed a little too cruel. In the blink of an eye, spring passed and summer arrived. Ninian was also 6 years old. Perhaps because of his age, Qin Yongyan usually didn't care about any holidays except for the spring festival. If the little fellow hadn't suddenly asked when she came home from school, Qin Yongyan would have even forgotten that he had to celebrate a child's birthday. May 5th, wasn't today Ninian's birthday? After looking at the calendar, Qin Yongyan slapped his forehead and realized. After comforting the little fellow for a while, he hurriedly rushed out to buy her a cake. To be honest, although Qin Yongyan had a scholarly, easygoing, and otherworldly temperament, he was actually a straight man of steel. A straight man, usually, he only knew how to practice martial arts. But now, he suddenly wanted him to make the child happy. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? If the little girl in the cake shop didn't kindly remind him, Qin Yongyan wouldn't even know to prepare 6 candles for Ninian. Fortunately, Ninian's temperament had changed. If it was when she was still alive, this little thing would immediately cry out of grievance. Ninian didn't cry. After seeing her grandfather lighting the candles in a hurry, she followed what her mother taught her before, closed her eyes and seriously made a wish. Her wish was very simple, that was, she hoped that her father could come back soon. Therefore, after simply eating a few mouthfuls of cake, the little fellow let Qin Yongyan accompany her to sing, "Insects Fly," just like how she used to celebrate her birthday. The dark sky was low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you accompany me.